But if we get along, what do we care, say we? When he holds me close, close as we can be, I tell the lad that I'm grateful and I'm glad that I'm nobody else but me. I was a shy, demure type, inhibited, insecure type of girl, a pearl of no great price was I.
West Hartford Public School Board of Education meeting of February 21st, 2018. Cameron, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Blanks?
Here.
Dr. Greenberg?
Here.
Mr. Levine?
Here.
Mr. Paul Uke?
Here.
Ms. Polun?
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson?
Here.
Mr. Sedanowitz?
Here.
Student Representative Grace Andrews?
Here.
And Maddie Pliskin.
Here.
Thank you. Give me a hint. Who gets to lead us in the... Please.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment of reflection after the shooting at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, that took 17 lives. As parents and teachers of young people, this event is particularly difficult to process, but I'm also thinking about all of us as citizens of our local and national community. We have seen far too many horrific events, both in Connecticut and in the rest of the country, for us to be satisfied merely with adding our thoughts and prayers. There are many different ideas about how to combat this scourge, and I'm not here to pitch any one in particular. Instead, I call on all of us to take a moment now to reflect, not only on the lives so tragically lost, but on what each of you, each of us, can do moving forward to prevent other such horrors. Thank you. We have no student participation, is that correct? Okay. So, public communications. These are comments on topics of interest from the public. Remember that the board members do not respond to any comments. As usual, you're limited to 3 minutes per individual and 21 minutes per subject matter. But we do ask you, since we have so many people who want to speak and then a long agenda following that, to please keep your remarks as short as you can and to remind you that there is no need to repeat a point that has already been made. Thanks. Yes, I have a list. I'm sorry. So first I have Sarah Raskin. Oh, and please state your name and your address.
My name is Sarah Raskin, and my address is 193 North Quaker Lane in West Hartford. I'm only going to take a brief moment. I just wanted to take a second to thank you, the board members and the student members, to thank Ann McKiernan and the members of this committee who have been doing a tremendous job at looking at implementation of school start times. And I just wanted to remind the board not only of the science, which we've presented here before, which I think is overwhelming, but also to remind you that every kid is making choices all the time. And so my son, for example, was on the baseball team and also in the jazz band at Hall High School, and there came a point in which he was told, you can't go on Euro Tour and play on the varsity baseball team, you need to choose. And so he had to choose one or the other. And so there are many, many difficulties to implementation of this, and I don't want to minimize that at all, but I just want to put that within the context of the fact that students every day are having to make tough choices. You all every day are having to make tough choices, and parents every day are having to make tough choices. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Jason Buckman.
Hi, my name is Jason Buckman. I am a senior at Hall High School, and I live at 33 Westridge Drive. I'll be talking to you today about the survey you all should have in front of you. If you all want to see one, there's a pile on that table over there if you want to follow along. I'm just going to start off with some brief demographics. I started the survey with the help of Miss Raskin. Sorry.
It's not you.
With the help of Miss Raskin, I created the survey back in November. Since then, I have implemented it at Conard and Hall. So far, we have 672 respondents. I have closed the survey. We have pretty equal representation from both Conard and Hall and from all 4 grades. I'm going to get right into the sleep section. It should be on your 3rd page. I'm just going to point out a few quick things that we should all really notice. So right now, on an average school night, kids are getting an average of 6 hours and 42 minutes of sleep. Compared to a weekend night or a break night, where kids are getting 9 hours and 34 minutes of sleep per night. I know I personally tend to sleep more on weekends because I'm making up for all of my lost sleep during the school week. I can find myself sleeping to maybe even 12 o'clock on Saturday. It's ridiculous. As you can see, on both the weeknight and the weekend night, people go to bed at around an average of between 11:30 and 12 o'clock. This does not change between weeknights and weekends. Teens naturally go to sleep around 11, 12 o'clock. And you can see that the average wake-up time really makes the change in the amount of sleep these kids are getting. You can see 9:35 a.m. average weekend time versus 6:16 a.m. average school day time. And that pretty much directly correlates to the amount of sleep. Not the time kids are going to bed, but the time kids are waking up. Let's see. I got a lot of data. There's been a lot of talking about after-school activities, how this change will affect after-school activities. People are very involved. On the second page, you can see a lot of them participate in sports and clubs. Some participate in jobs and internships. Okay. You can see that jobs start at an average of 4:03 p.m., moving the school end time back to 3:15. Won't really affect that. Same with the sibling care. People start taking care of their siblings at an average of at 3 p.m. Up next, Anastasia will be talking about the comments in the end of the survey. Thank you.
Thank you, and I know we don't comment, but I just have to say commendations to the statistics teachers and the mathematics teachers. This is very impressive. Next we have Anna Stasik.
Hi, my name is Anastasia Karnova. I am a senior at Hall High School. I live at 11 Edgebrook Drive, West Hartford, Connecticut at 06117. I'm here to you today as a person that is highly active in my community as well, and find that also affects the amount of sleep that I get. And I tend to stay up, as well as many of the comments I will read to you right now from the survey of students who were not asked to put a specific comment. These are students who reached out and were asked if they have anything additional to say about the quality of their sleep. One student said, "School is more of a depressant than anything. Everyone in the school is stressed, depressed, or some other thing. It's rare to see someone energized. Everyone is cranky in the morning. When we have delays, everyone seems to be more energized. The school talks about how they want everyone's potential and willpower to try their best in school, but most of the students are literally falling asleep in class and are starving because they had to skip breakfast in order to make school early. I've done that multiple times. It's rare for me to even have breakfast, period. Sleep is a necessity. Who is school to deprive us of a necessity? I've gone multiple days with 40 minutes of sleep due to the fact that I have so much other stuff to deal with. School should be a place that's loved and should be a place that everyone should feel energized and happy to go to. Everything is harder than it should be when you're being deprived of sleep. And of course, people say, then just sleep earlier. How can people do that when on average they have 7 hours of school, 2 hours of sports or after-school programs or detentions, 1 to 2 hours of homework? Then commonly kids get jobs to accommodate their needs, which at least 3 to 4 hours, and that's only on average. Most kids have other things to deal with, family problems, chores, personal issues, and or hobbies. That's most of your day gone already. And people have the audacity to say sleep earlier. That was all one student. Another student says, some people take sports, clubs, dance class, and more, and I believe it is not fair to these people who are only under the age of 18 to be working that hard, especially when they are tired from waking up this early. There's also a majority of people who have personal or family issues, and waking up that early is only affecting them more. The quality of my sleep is greatly affected due to school, so thank you. Another student says, I'm extremely overwhelmed with the amount of schoolwork and extracurriculars I do, and the most intense obstacle in the way is the amount of sleep I get. If I get even 1 or 2 extra hours of sleep per night on school days, my grades and mood would improve. I get very little sleep, which has recently contributed to my pneumonia. I missed 7 days of school and now have to catch up during Thanksgiving break. One simply says we get up too early. Another says, I don't get enough sleep during the week, so on weekends I sleep for around 12 hours each day. One says, I could use more sleep to be more focused and active in class. Another wrote a quite large paragraph. Says that I believe that if school started later, everyone would be a lot more focused. They would have time to complete homework in the morning if they had no time the night before, and they could fit in somewhat of a breakfast to fuel them. They will be less likely to miss their bus, and this could also improve the focus during class. Coming from someone with many friends, I can definitely say that every day at least one person tells me how busy their day was the day before. They explained that they didn't get home until a later time, and then had to do their homework until the midnight or 1 or 2 a.m. Many people also have trouble going to sleep and have explained that they don't fall asleep until 3, 4, or 5 in the morning. Another student said,
You're actually out of time. But just to be clear, all of these statements
Yes,
are in the back of
packet.
this.
Yes.
So believe me, we will read them.
Thank you.
Thank you, yeah. Oh, you're doing the timing too. I didn't realize. Oh, so you don't just have to pay attention to me and my little finger. Cammie's actually giving you time. Yellow means 2 minutes, and red means time's up. Thank you. I didn't even know you were doing that. Great. Next is Mary. I can't even, I'm sorry, I can't.
I'll say it. Good evening. I'm Mary Fleischle, and I live at 28 Brunswick Avenue. First, I want to thank the committee for all your hard work, and I was happy to see from your report how much you've learned from other school districts who've made this change, and that you've been doing that research. So my son is a high schooler, and my daughter's an 8th grader who goes to Conard for high school math at 7:30 in the morning, and the three of us are strongly in favor of later start times. My son played freshman soccer, and my daughter plans to play multiple sports starting next year, so I'm here as a parent of athletes. Now, I want my kids to do sports so they're healthy, strong, and successful in life, but both sports and sleep are critical for my kids' mental and physical health. With later start times, they'll get more sleep. And I know they'll play better when they're less tired. There's been numerous studies showing that athletes have fewer injuries and better reaction times when they're well rested. And also, while it would be great if my daughter ends up playing soccer in college, I'm not counting on that. My priority is really for her to make it through high school with a great education and be mentally and physically healthy. And I'm currently very concerned about how exhausted my kids and their friends are. So I saw in the report that later start times might mean up to 262 early dismissals due to away games, and that sounded like a lot to me until I started thinking about that spread over 124 teams. So that would mean for each sport an athlete plays, the average would only be 2 early dismissals per athlete. And our students already miss classes due to illness and appointments. And while missing class is not ideal, missing class on occasion forces them to advocate for themselves, speak to teachers, and plan ahead. And these are all valuable life skills that they'll be forced to practice. Also, I believe that estimate of 262 assumed that other towns wouldn't accommodate us by allowing for later start times for games. or matches, and I would think that some other towns would be accommodating and willing to do that. It would be interesting to see an estimate that included the expected number of times other towns would accommodate us based on what Greenwich or Newtown has found, since they've been experiencing that this year. And it might mean only an average of 1 early dismissal per athlete in that case. So, and I was also happy to see that you've been talking to Greenwich and Newtown, because they might come up with ways to mitigate the impact of any early dismissals, such as improving efficiency and getting to the away games, or scheduling classes so that more electives and study halls are the last period class, and making sure that coaches have a free period as their last class. So lastly, one additional benefit of moving games later onto weekends is more parents would be very happy about that. I know I missed most of the first half of my son's soccer games, since 3:45 was a really difficult time to get out of work, and I would have been happier to see more of them. In conclusion, while I know there are many logistical challenges for athletics if high school starts later, I feel the mental and physical benefits outweigh these challenges. Thank you for all you do for the kids in West Hartford, and I really appreciate how you're taking their health seriously.
Thank you. Anna Schusterman.
Hi, I'm Anna Schusterman. I live at 25 Owings Road. I'm a professor of developmental psychology at Wesleyan University, and I study children's academic outcomes and mental health and well-being as part of my research. I want to focus on mental health, especially anxiety for kids. If you take a broader picture than just thinking about sleep, there are many sources of anxiety for our kids. I'll just focus on 2. One is academic stress. It's enormous at high-achieving high schools like those that we have in West Hartford. Once in a while, you might read about a rash of suicides at schools that are very similar to ours, and the adults all shake their heads and wonder what's going to happen, and then start offering mindfulness classes. But actually, what we can do is start to address some of the root causes. When we study academic stress at high-achieving schools, it's very, very high. It looks as high or higher than sometimes is apparent to us from the outside. Another huge stressor is social media. As the research comes out, it's becoming clearer and clearer that we're in an unprecedented social experiment taking place at the expense of our teenagers, and it's not really looking that great. And it's clear that, especially for vulnerable kids, it has negative mental health consequences. Of course, if you take it away from them, they're less connected to their friends, which can be a buffer, so it's extremely complicated. But in the worst cases, you have things like cyberbullying and really negative outcomes there as well. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not just poor sleep that's causing anxiety and poor mental health for our kids. It's a lot of other pressures, some of which we have control over and some of which we don't. So, and there's a whole bunch of other things that maybe fewer kids or not all kids are subjected to, like family stress, sexual harassment and assault, illness, other challenging conditions, and basically all the aspects of the human condition that affect teenagers just like they affect us. So what does sleep have to do with it? It's just a huge lever. It's connected to all of these different things. In one study that I was involved with about academic stress in high-achieving high schools, sleep was related to nearly every other factor we looked at, including diet, substance use, academic achievement, and all sorts of other things. So poor sleep is a consequence of some of these other things, but it's also a cause. Poor sleep, definitively, the science is very clear, causes worse mental health. And so I think this is an incredibly important issue for us to address. It's a matter of values and priorities. Of course, there are a lot of considerations. There's complicated transportation systems and athletic schedules and all these other things. But I just can't think of anything that's more important than our children's health and well-being. And so the question should really be not whether we adopt later start times, but how we implement it. And I thank you, and I commend the committee that has obviously done an incredible amount of work trying to answer that question.
Thank you. Abigail Adams. Okay, Jillian Gilchrist.
Good evening, members of the Board of Education. I'm Jillian Gilchrist. I live at 329 Fern Street, and I am the mother of 2 children, ages 5 and 8, a kindergartner and a 3rd grader at Morley Elementary School. I'm also a former member of the Board of Education. Nice to be back on this side. I'm currently running for state representative in the 18th District of West Hartford, and I support later start times. I want to thank the board for this thoughtful process and for those on the Rethinking School Start Times Committee for their work. When this conversation first came up more than 15 years ago, West Hartford would have been an outlier. But as you can see from the work of this committee, school districts throughout Connecticut are making the move to later start times. Guilford, New Fairfield, Ridgefield, Westport, New Canaan, Greenwich, and Newtown have all changed their school start times, and Simsbury and Avon are on their way. It certainly might be easier if every school district changed their start times at once, in particular as it relates to athletics, but that isn't likely to happen without more towns calling for this change. State lawmakers listen to their constituents, in this case, schools. And if more schools change their start times, the will to make the change statewide increases. West Hartford is in a unique position to help lead this change in partnership with fellow school districts in our Central Conference. As with Greenwich and Newtown, West Hartford can partner with Simsbury and Avon to secure agreements for later competition times with other districts in the conference. If our region of the state and Fairfield County can show success with later school start times, this helps build the will to enact a law statewide. The bottom line is we all want what is best for our children and to prepare all students to realize their potential. If pushing back school start times can help us achieve that, then we can and should find a way to make that happen. Regardless of what happens in November, I'm happy to help advocate for this change here in our town and at the state legislature. Thank you for your time tonight and for the work that you all do.
Thank you. Jacob Warblow? Someone signed in for him. Okay. How about, that's all right. No problem. We have time afterwards, too. Oliver Goldstein.
Hello, my name is Oliver Goldstein, and I am a 6th grader at Sedgwick Middle School. I live at 8 Castlewood Road. I love history, and I read a book about Christopher Columbus in 4th grade. Before I read that book, I thought that Christopher Columbus was a great man, because in school, I had learned that he discovered America. I think it is important for other children to know Christopher Columbus treated other people, how Christopher Columbus treated other people. Christopher Columbus ordered Native Americans to find gold. When they did not come back with gold, he killed them. Columbus is not fit for the praise we give him. Also, there is no day in the United States of America that we celebrate the great people of Indigenous America. Please consider educating the students in West Hartford on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jennifer Kreisberg. No? Okay. Angie Coronado.
Hello. My name is Angie Coronado. I live on 10 Washington Circle, and I'm a sophomore at Hall High. So for Christopher Columbus, I think it's important for us to be educated and know truly like what type of person he was. And I know there's talk about being this like as a thing, as a racing history, but I feel like it's opening us more to the information that we weren't unaware of. And I feel like there's better ways to teach the young than fabricate this lie and make Christopher to be out this courageous man, because he did do horrible things. And there is a population of Native Americans in Connecticut, and I feel like it's disrespectful to have them hear this man be praised while they attend our school and live in our society, and they shouldn't be subjected to such things. And there are better ways on how to educate our kids. Like, I do recall at a previous meeting that we came up with an idea to possibly make more kid-friendly books that promote true things that actually happen in history, and not try to make it as this like fake thing, because as they grow older, they are going to end up being more aware and learn the truth. So might as well give it to them while they're young. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Heather Ferguson, please.
Hello, I'm Heather Ferguson Hull, 24 Fairley Road. I'm a little taller, West Hartford, Connecticut. As a resident and a parent of 2 Conard graduates, I urge the board to discontinue the observance of Columbus Day. The West Hartford public school system engages in research-based practices, and historical research informs us that Columbus was not the first European to travel to this hemisphere, and that he was, in fact, the cause of immense suffering of the indigenous people. We have very few holidays that honor an individual by name, and it seems long overdue that we should stop glorifying a man whose behavior is worthy of condemnation, not of celebration. I believe it is important to honor the original inhabitants of this hemisphere, not a man who disfigured, raped, enslaved, and killed them. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. And now, once again, using the remainder of her time, is Sarah Raskin.
My name is Sarah Raskin, and I live at 193 Quaker Lane North. And I want to speak also to changing the name of the holiday from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And I just want to make the point quickly that learning the history of Indigenous peoples and transforming this day into a celebration of Indigenous people and a celebration of social justice will allow us to make a connection between the great contributions that Indigenous people and their leaders have made to our state and a reminder of their painful history. It'll also allow us to make connections and understanding of the ongoing marginalization, discrimination, and poverty that many Indigenous communities face to this day, as well as the impressive cultural, artistic, and economic contributions that they continue to make. This change would lead to greater awareness, not just of the rich history of Indigenous peoples that we have right here in West Hartford and in the state of Connecticut, but also issues facing Indigenous peoples today. And I realize that our students, especially at the elementary school level, do learn some of the rich history of the Indigenous people of Connecticut within their regular school curriculum. But I think having a day every year that reminds them as they go through the entire school curriculum will allow not only the schools but their families to be reminded of it each year. I'm a professor at Trinity College, and I can say that virtually none of my students has had any education in the history of or treatment of the 10 million or so people who lived here before Europeans arrived. I realize that Indigenous Peoples Day would be just one day, and that it couldn't fully address Native American history by itself, but it could help bring a focus to this history in our schools, where many history textbooks leave out Native Americans or sanitize the treatment of them. And equally important, it could teach information that Native Americans are not just history. Many of my college students often think of them as people who lived in the past, rather than living people who continue to practice their culture today. And this, too, is a notion that Indigenous Peoples Day could help dispel. Thus, in addition to just changing the name of the day, West Hartford and West Hartford schools could plan amazing cultural and educational events that all of our residents could use to learn more about the rich history and the current and ongoing culture of these members of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, I believe, Jane Lehman.
Thank you. My name is Jane Lehman, and I live at 70 Ferncliff Drive in West Hartford. I just wanted to preface my remarks saying that we do know that there are some very good things going on in the West Hartford Public Schools, and I believe that for the spring semester that there is some work going on with the Mohegan tribe, and we're very grateful to hear that, and that's a very good thing. I will not repeat anything that's been said so far. I just wanted to say that the K through 12 social studies mission, I just wanted to point out in that mission statement that the purpose of the history and social studies curriculum is to prepare students to ask and seek answers to meaningful questions and prepare them with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to become informed participants in an ever-changing global community and to act responsibly to improve its condition. And we feel the work that this committee has been doing feel very strongly that perpetuating these same old myths doesn't fulfill that mission whatsoever, and to honor the colonized rather than the colonizer is much more in line with fulfilling that mission, and we hope that you'll consider that when you consider changing the name. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all both for your input, which we are listening to, and also for your keeping to time. You are all more than welcome to stay if you'd like. And also just a reminder to those who did not make it to this, you still have time, or they still have time at the end of the meeting if they want. But we will now move on to unfinished business. And a motion to accept revised policies 4040, 4160, and 5720. That is as a second reading. Can I have a motion, please?
I'd like to make a motion that we accept policy 4040.
Right, to do
as
it separately.
a second reading.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so let's do them one by one.
Yep.
Okay. So we have a motion to consider 4040, the nepotism, employment of relatives motion. Can I hear a second, please?
Second.
Okay, discussion.
So this is the policy that we accepted as a first reading at our last meeting. There were not any changes made in between the meetings, and unless anybody has any amendments, we can move for further discussion or a vote.
I would note. It's not working. I would just note Kimberly Bonham is here, our corporation counsel, in case there's any legal questions with any of these.
Thank you.
Kimberly, can you bring us up to speed on the questions that maybe I hope were forwarded to you from last meeting?
The questions related to this?
Yeah.
The 4040? Sorry. Well, it's my understanding that there was a question. I wasn't at the meeting, but I did review the tape on WHC, and it looks like there was a question that there was some discussion about whether or not if multiple people ended up having to recuse themselves, if that would have an impact on the quorum. But actually, recusing yourself doesn't have any impact on whether there's a quorum to be able to hold the vote. It would just simply be a recusal. So conceivably, if 6 of you ended up having to recuse yourself, then the one person remaining is the one who would vote on it. So there seemed to be a little bit of confusion there about what happens if too many people have to recuse themselves. So that's what would happen.
If that's the case, and that's what I thought, can I make a motion to your motion? It seems to me if it doesn't violate the rules, that we ought to just say that if there's a member of your immediate family, then you shouldn't, where is it? You shouldn't vote, period. In other words, could I propose that we take out the unless requested to do so by a majority of the members of the Board of Education, and only after full disclosure of the relationship has been made? In other words, if there's no violation to simply excluding people from engaging in nepotistic behavior, can we just say you can't do it? Just.
Well, I guess, and Kimberly, I'm not arguing with you by any means.
Yep.
So, because words mean things, and that's why lawyers get paid, the minimum number of members of an assembly to make a vote essentially is 1 in this case, because that would represent a quorum. But that doesn't represent an assembly. So to your example, when you said if 6 had a conflict and recused themselves, the one person voting doesn't represent an assembly, which would need a quorum.
No, I probably didn't make myself clear enough. So you need to have a certain number of members to hold the meeting. That would be the quorum.
Right.
But once you have the appropriate number of members to open that meeting and hold that meeting, then the voting can take place after that, as long as somebody is there to vote.
Well, so I guess the example, so if this were our meeting today and all are present, but all have to recuse themselves but 1, that doesn't represent an assembly. It represents, or a quorum.
It does represent a quorum.
And that's- You already
Because
have
the
the-
motion doesn't need a quorum, the meeting needs to have a quorum.
Well,
To hold
the vote needs a quorum.
No, the
No.
meeting needs a quorum. That's the point. Once the meeting quorum has been established, the vote is the vote.
Yes,
Is that-
once you have a quorum, you can hold your meeting. And then at that point, the votes are the votes.
Right, and
So one vote can, in this example that we used,
It's a little out there for an example, but yes, if you had, for example, if you had a group that consisted of 100 members, and if 99 of them had to recuse themselves, then the one person left is the vote. Do they vote yes or no? It's adopted or it fails. It doesn't typically happen, and so that's sort of taking the example to the extreme. But once you have met the quorum to open the meeting, then after that, if people need to recuse themselves, they can do so.
right, and so that's why I was thinking to take up your point from last time, that rather than, what was left here is unless we vote as a majority to let people vote even though there's nepotism, right? What I'm saying is, since there is never a contractual obligation to have those extra people, why don't we simply say, you can't vote if there's a nepotistic situation, period? Why not, in other words, why not take away the majority possibility and just say, you can't, full stop? So that's my proposal.
yeah, I don't disagree. We need another motion because the motion was made to accept this.
Right,
So
well, so
we
that's what I'm asking is, I'm asking if people will vote to amend this motion.
Yeah,
So-
I agree. I agree with you, given the light that, the definition of a quorum, I guess, and, and how that goes. Yeah. I would like to probably add some language that would represent that.
Well, so I'm not sure I understand you. What I'm proposing, and again, we can vote this down, but is that the second paragraph read, a board member should not vote, or shall not, I think we're going to change it to shall, but anyway, shall not vote on any action of the board which will directly affect a member of the immediate family of the member, period.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop. So
Yep.
my motion is just to delete the rest of that sentence.
And change should to shall.
And change should to shall, yes, which
Yes.
we were thought to do last time, but
Yes.
just, is there any other discussion on my amendment to the motion? Ready? Oh, you need a sec, I need a second.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on just the amendment piece? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. So now, does this have to be become a first reading again, or can we accept this as a change and still vote on it?
I would say that you can accept it as a change and vote on the policy as amended.
Okay, then let's proceed. Are there other? Oh. Oh, okay. All right, so if I understand you, then, now that we've amended it, is there any discussion on the amended motion? Or are we ready to vote on the whole 40-40 motion? Okay, hearing no more discussion, all in favor of accepting the revised motion on nepotism 40-40, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the ayes have it. Moving on then to, can I have a motion, please, that the Board of Education accept as a second reading 4160, publication or creation of materials, copyrights, and patents?
So I'll make a motion that the board accept policy 4160 as the second reading for the,
Yeah, we just need a second now.
okay.
I'll second it.
Okay, discussion. Please, Carol, or whoever.
So this one was simple. Last time we had discussed this, and basically we covered that any West Hartford Public School staff member who wrote or published educational material would be, that material would be the property of the board. So they couldn't basically, I guess, front that off as their own. That is considered West Hartford Board of Education property. Is there any discussion or questions? That was pretty straightforward when we discussed it last time.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes once again have it. The excitement is mounting. We have one more motion, please, if I may. I call for a motion that we accept as a second reading, 5720, Search and Seizure. Motion? Somebody take it?
I'll make a motion that we accept policy 5720.
You can. Second? Discussion. This is the breathalyzer one. Right?
Yeah, if I could just say one thing in terms of my description of it last week, just to make sure I'm perfectly clear and there's no misconceptions. This is intended to be used at an event like a prom, homecoming dance, or other events that we feel like there's a need to, where students walk in, we all had that demonstration. I didn't mention, and I should, because as I said, the intention here isn't disciplinary. However, there is another situation where it could be used where it's not everybody being screened. If we have a concern for a student, sometimes people think, oh, you're concerned that student's been drinking because you want to get them in trouble. No, they may have driven their own car to school. They may have done something. We're responsible for their safety on school grounds and when they leave. So this could be part of a assessment being done to a student, or being requested of a student, when that student is exhibiting signs of drunkenness or something where we're worried about that child's safety. So I just want to make that clear too, because I didn't mention that, I think, explicitly.
Actually, that is helpful to know. Any other discussion? Were you still comfortable with that? Okay. With no further discussion, then all in favor of accepting 5720? Sorry. All opposed? The ayes have it once again. Thank you very much, and thank you, Kimberly. Okay, now on to new business. And I'm going to call for a motion that the Board of Education appoint Mr. Michonne Donaldson and Mr. Robert Herr Jr. as board representatives to the Risk Management Advisory Board for the period of January 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2020.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we've discussed this before and everyone's seen the bios. Any more discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations, Mr. Donaldson and Mr. Herr. Okay, on to acceptance of school construction project as complete. And as far as I know, since it was 2012, we should be able to certify it. So may I have a motion, please, that we accept the following school project as being complete and authorize the superintendent of schools to request payment of the school construction grant of the state from the State Department of Administrative Services, the Morley School Asbestos Removal, State Project Number 155-0236 CV.
So moved.
Second? Okay.
So
Sir?
I've got Bob Palmer and Chris Cycley here again, who you're getting familiar with, who oversee so many of our projects. Now let Bob and Chris explain what exactly this means.
Sure. So back in 2012, we did a flooring replacement project at Morley. As part of that project, we received a state grant for the asbestos abatement portion of that. And this is really just a housekeeping item at the end of the project to close the project out and to receive the retainage that the state holds on to from our grant. We've received the majority of the grant payment already. We did have some housekeeping paperwork issues to follow up with the state. We're worked on closing this out. We have a few more of these probably coming to you in the next few months here anyhow. So it's really just a formality to accept the project as closed, and we'll just get our money.
Not being a specialist, can you say that it's done? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Would you say it's done so we can trust you?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
Bob, I had a question. Could you just, for me, because I'm curious, where is the asbestos located in the school?
Sure. So this was a flooring replacement project. The original flooring, as in many of our buildings, the adhesive sometimes the adhesive and sometimes the tile itself contains a certain amount of asbestos material. Very typical. So, and it's a requirement that we abate that under the guidance of an environmental specialist. We're not allowed to have any children in the building when we do such type of work. And it is, that work is eligible for grant reimbursement from the state. And that's what this was. So, and we do these flooring replacements. You've heard me talk about it during the CIP process. We got one coming up this summer at King Philip. We'll have the same process.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. All in favor of accepting the project as being complete, please say aye.
Aye.
No? Okay. We are briskly moving to C, approval of plans and specifications for the high school science project. So first I need a motion, please, that we approve Phase 2 of the project, fixtures, furnishing, equipment, and data technology equipment, plans and specifications dated February 21st, 2018, for the Hall High School Science Laboratory classrooms.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Discussion?
Sure. As we talked about a few weeks ago, we're back with Phase 2, which is our furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and also our IT package. This is a much smaller amount of equipment. The total budget for this Phase 2 is approximately $611,000. I had provided in your packets that you received last week just some renderings of what the classrooms will look like and what the furniture packages will look like. The majority of this $611,000, about $400,000, will be utilized to purchase furniture. And the whole key in working with the faculty and the architects and the staff at Hall High School, really we wanted flexible furniture that allowed multiple variations of floor plans in each of the classrooms. And I think you can see that in the images that I provided to you last week. This furniture provides flexibility for lecture, for group work. The chairs are to be utilized at the desks and at the lab stations, so we don't have duplication there. They're on wheels, so they're easily movable throughout the classroom. This is good, long-lasting furniture. It's going to have to last a while. We're not going to do this again. So we hold on to our stuff a long time, as you know. And we also, we worked very diligently with our IT department, Jared Morin, our CIO, for the board and the town. I'm picking out technology for all of this. That also is included in this package, and it's about $200,000 worth of technology. So a lot of Chromebooks, carts, projector systems, TV monitors, that type of thing. We talked about the data, the IT that was going to be going into these classrooms, wireless points and all that other types of things. So those are really some of the highlights of this package. Same process as last time as in Phase 1. We'll be going to the state on March 13th in order to ask for permission to go for them to review this package, and then we'll put it out to bid. So that at this point, we're just asking for you to approve this, the plans and specifications, along with the budget, and then we'll be able to go to the state and move this phase of the project along as we did in Phase 1.
Thank you. Questions?
I have a question. Just okay, it's a simple one. Just going through the packet here and looking at the chairs that are designed for the students opposed to the chairs designed for the teachers, it just didn't look very comfortable. And I'm sure it's ergonomically and has all that in there, but what kind of material is the chairs for the students made out of?
It's
a high-density plastic is
right.
what it is,
Yeah.
but it does have some move in it. It's not as rigid as it may look. There are actually samples of these chairs. There were samples of these chairs at the high school. I believe they were picked up, but all of the not all of the administration, but I know the principal, science department chair, and a few others. A few of the science staff had the opportunity to kind of sit and touch and feel. Right. We had several. There were about 6 or 7 chairs, I think, that in total, that we had that they tested out, and this is what we resolved to.
So they were vetted by the people using them?
Yes. Yep.
Great. Other questions? Okay, all in favor of approving the fixtures, furnishings, equipment, and data technology equipment plans and specifications, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You're good to go, guys. Thank you very much. And now, Part D, because the list doesn't end. The proposed calendar for the 2019-2020 school year. This is a first reading. A motion that the Board of Education review as a first reading the proposed calendar for the 2019-2020 school year. First, can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second? Okay, just to be clear on the process, we talk about it today. If we want to make any changes, I think we should vote to ask Tom to make those changes, but we don't vote on the final calendar until whenever, March, I think. Okay, just to be clear about how the process works.
Sure. All right, so this is the calendar which for years created consternation, and then there became a uniform regional calendar understanding from CREC, which legislature passed and actually moved away from. It's not state law in the same way to use it, but I don't know of anyone that's moving back. I've talked to other area superintendents, and this has become uniform. One of the reasons for that is because of open choice, CREC, the common nature of teachers living in other towns with their kids and being on different vacations. Basically, the desire is that people have more uniform calendars for the area towns. You know, all the things we talked about before, athletic events, all those things. This makes it a little more logical. So with that, this calendar, one of the things you'll notice, like this year, when Good Friday falls, it's actually before you could do the April vacation. So I've had people say, why didn't you move it up? Well, because it's the way the uniform calendar works. This one, it works in that time frame for April vacation. February vacation, we have that same 2-day instead of the long week vacation. So there's really no huge changes, although this is one of those years where I think this is as long as the December vacation can be. That's basically it. And with school once again starting before Labor Day. So.
Okay, comments, questions?
The conferences that take place in November and then again in the spring, are those known in advance? I mean, can you tell me now when the November and the spring conferences will be?
Those usually come out when we actually base them off of this in some ways, because they come out for the high schools, especially. You'd want grades in that time frame. We usually do that calendar, Paul, the CSI calendar. I'd say April is when. Yeah, we base it kind of off of this calendar rather than setting it.
So the reason I ask is I had a parent contact me and make what I thought was an excellent recommendation, which was to add to the one-page calendar a marking indicating when the conferences will be, and with a note saying, please pay attention to early release days or delayed start days. And I'm wondering if that's something that we could do.
I'll be honest with you, the problem would be the second half of the year, because of snow days end up getting moved. So the early ones, you maybe could, although we don't have it yet. Not this year. You can make a motion that in future years we try to do that. We could. It's hard to plan it without knowing exactly when. I mean, we could do it as a model. I would say the second half of the year, it may create confusion. And that's why you'll notice at the end, we diamond off at the end of the year after the 11th, 12, 15, 16, 17, 18. We just do that based on the historic number of average snow days. I've had people say, well, you can't have school the 19th. And I'm like, no, I just don't want to diamond in the whole month. So, and that's a question that we get a lot too, where people say, why isn't graduation day on here? We can't set graduation until April 1st. So I understand the question. What I'd refer them to is every building on the building web, every school on their school webpage has the information on their upcoming events calendar. So I know it's asking them to go to 2 places, but I'm not sure we could reasonably put on second semester on here. We don't have exams on here or anything like that either.
But we could do first semester. It feels
I couldn't
like.
right now. We don't have it.
But we're not going to publish this until several months from now?
No, 1 month from now when it's voted on.
Well, maybe, I mean, I am agnostic about this question, but if it would be helpful, at least maybe we have various notes, italicized notes on the bottom. Maybe we could say something like, please check your school's website for
certainly something like that. We can do a better job communicating. It's the first time I've ever heard that request, so it's something we can look at, and I can talk to the principals about putting it out there, and I'll talk to Paul in the curriculum office and see if there is anything in the in-between time from this reading and the next reading as far as if we have a good idea, but I'm not sure that we do right now. And sometimes that depends. There's other things that can get in the way of conferences too, but I'd want to defer to Paul and talk more about it because it's his office that plans that out.
So I'll just try one more thing, which is I think we're voting on the dates of the calendar, but not necessarily the specific layout of this page. Is that correct?
No, this is what becomes the calendar in the book.
It does become it.
Yes.
So the question is, if we approve these dates as school days, non-school days, et cetera, later, before these calendars go to print, however many thousands you get printed, could it be added in, or would that require a specific board motion later to add that onto a calendar before it goes to print?
I would need you guys to say that now that you want that in the calendar.
Can I make a comment? I'll just take the contrarian point of view. As a parent of children at least the elementary school level so far, I feel like the schools have done an excellent job of always communicating to us as parents, either directly or through the PTO organizations about conferences. I get emails beat over the head of reminders as we get closer and closer about when these are. The teachers reach out to them themselves. So I just don't know if we need to go this far to create another avenue where people can look at it when they get so many different types of communication about this. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, if we're going to discuss it, I don't think to use a colloquialism, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. You know, it's adding something that you could use temporary and then have to do it again. The online version is very changeable, and the schools communicate at the local level, not the board level. So this is a board calendar, and you got to sign up for the the dates anyway. You know, you have to pencil your name in for 2:00 on a Wednesday, and they still have to do that. So I mean, I don't know. I don't want to make it more complicated. You know, this is at the higher level, and let the schools use it at the lower level and have that delineation.
Actually, that is something I didn't think of. There could be unique differences between the schools. Something could happen on a given day which would change. We have a general sign up, but there's also I mean, it certainly could go on there. I'm not saying it can't. It's something I just have to talk to Paul about before the next meeting. It would be.
Okay, but it does sound like, unless I hear more in the other direction, that it's a good question, but it's probably not worth all the extra effort that it's going to involve to do this. Is that, you look skeptical?
Well, I would disagree. I think it's worth trying, because even though, I mean, we could say the same thing about any of these days. Why put Veterans Day on the calendar? Why put Martin Luther King Jr. Day? The schools are going to communicate that to the parents. I mean, there's a reason we put a calendar together, and one of the reasons is so that families can plan. And the sooner that families, particularly those who have working parents involved and are trying to set up after-school care or other arrangements for their kids, the sooner they have the information, I think the better. So if it's possible to even do it in the online version, which you say is changeable, I think that would be a useful thing for families in our town to have.
Well, so again, since there are differences at each school, and there potentially can be, again, those are federal holidays you mentioned. Those are throughout the country. It's not per school, and it's not per teacher. Some teachers come in at 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning. Some come at stay out till 7 o'clock at night, and some have to leave early for daycare and things like that. So again, you know, leaving it at the highest level, this particular that we vote on, you know, we wouldn't vote on a particular school calendar item that a PTO would put on, and or if they're going to change their dates, slide them right for conferences or slide them left. That's not something we get involved with. That's at a much lower, I don't know, it's a much lower level, which is just different level. It's a school level. It's a local issue, if you will. And that doesn't really sound, but it's at that level. And I like leaving decisions at those levels so that they have the flexibility and they're not tied into a board calendar that represents a Christmas holiday, a Veterans Day at a federal level. This is, you don't want to get the minutia all mixed up in those local issues that the school can handle very eloquently. And, that's, someone said it earlier, if a student had to miss a class because start times have changed, it gives the opportunity for that student to communicate with the teacher. So here is an opportunity for a parent to communicate with teachers.
One last, and then I don't want to belabor too long, but another idea would be to block off a series of dates and say, these are potential conference dates. Please check with your individual school to get more information.
So I just want to go to you.
I'll just say again, I feel like it works okay the way it is. I mean, there's always going to be individuals, and I think like in our roles as the board, like you have to be careful not to put your individual hat on when you're here and think what's good for the masses. And while there's certainly parents that approach us and say that I think this would be a good idea for me, it's like, well, how does that affect the population as a whole? And again, just being in the system currently, I have never, ever had a problem. And maybe it's to Mark's point, like, the teachers are really good on the local level, letting us know when the conferences are. We have to sign up. There's a lot of, I guess, ownership there where, I don't know that this is going to make the difference. If you need this, I think at that point maybe you've missed the communication boat. There are so many ways that about this as it exists now. This seems like this will just muddy the waters, and I don't think we should change it at all.
Paul may be able to add a thought.
I just wanted to chime in because I hear you talking and I agree, and I think I understand what you're asking, Deb, but to kind of reinforce what I'm hearing from Rob and from Mark, the board votes on the calendar itself, the days that the school will be in session. The board has never exerted authority to vote on when parent conferences themselves would be. But if and I don't really hear you asking that, what I hear you asking is how can we support transparency? So we can work on that. I also don't want to muddy the water, so to speak, on those two issues, because I don't hear you saying that, but I think that's what I first heard when I was sitting back there. So that was just me not listening.
I will take
closely.
the opportunity to state for the record, you can make conferences whenever you want. I'm just trying to make it easier for families to know when they are as soon as possible.
Can I just, if I understand, it says on the bottom right, in italics, school calendars are posted on the West Hartford Public Schools website at www. So if what you're saying, Tom, is that each school does have its own information, can't we just...
I would say, and in fact, we could probably add language that makes it simple. We have a simple formula when we try to, as Tom was kind of alluding to it, we try to schedule them generally, a quarter of the way through a semester, or in the elementaries, it's a little bit different because it's broken into
I'm sorry,
thirds.
I'm not even suggesting that. I'm just saying that if in fact the calendars do exist by school, we could just say school calendars, including individual conferences, can be found on blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, the school website, yeah. So school calendars are posted on the West Hartford Public Schools website, whps.org. Yeah, I mean, please check your local school
Well,
calendar.
the point is we could just say school calendars, as well as individual schools,
So
whatever,
here's the solution.
are all posted or whatever.
Elementary, middle school, and high school are all different. They're not the same. That's the same for everybody. And that's what we vote on, because that's what the board is.
Right.
And when you get into the differences, and we're going to start itemizing middle school, elementary, high school, Conard, Hall, Morley, it just gets too much. You have to leave it at the lowest level of decision making, and that's at the schools. I think it's very clear, actually. And to Rob's point, I was going to say it when I went to go hit my button. I've tried to do this myself is that, you know, when you're at a sporting event or you're walking down the aisle of Big Y or Stop and Shop and someone stops you and they say, hey, can you do this? You know, you listen, right? But if you have 70 people, then it becomes a discussion. It's not the onesie and twosies. It's the masses that we have to bring to the table. The onesies and twosies, we can't bring those decisions and change things because a few or one or two parents decided to. And Deb, that's how you opened up the discussion. I talked with someone, a mom. So that's why I'm saying that. And if I misunderstood you, I apologize. But those are the kind of decisions we have to leave it at the highest level at the board for decisions that affect everyone, not just the individual school.
I would just to disagree only slightly on the process. If one person gave me a great idea, I would have no hesitation to bring it up. Right. Nevertheless, I think your point is, even if 70 people came and said it, it's complicated, and it makes this more complicated than it needs to be.
That's actually a good point. If 70 people came, it still would make it complicated and not the right decision. A very good point.
You comfortable with us?
I'm going to let this go for a minute, but I have an easier point of discussion. Can we change the spelling of Veterans Day on the calendar to have an apostrophe after the S?
Actually, while we're doing that, there's a couple of things. Veterans Day is Veterans apostrophe.
No, it's not right.
It isn't?
No, Veterans Day does not have an apostrophe.
Really?
Yes. It's the day to celebrate veterans, plural.
Well, plural, but it's not their.
No. S apostrophe would be for all the it's their day.
It's Veterans Day.
Wow. Okay, it's.
You have to call them Canada geese.
Right. Okay, Canadian Geese Day. I like that. Oh, well then
All right. Third try. Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King Jr. I know it is considered Martin Luther King Jr. Day on the correct calendar. I assume that means we're going to do that on ours as well. All right.
And there's a double parentheses, just while you're there, on school in session, parentheses, just on the typo. While we're fixing that, and I can't take credit for that, I'm not the one who noticed, but. School in session?
Oh, gotcha.
Okay. Veterans Day, so it's just a day, it doesn't belong to veterans, it's not a, wow, okay. See, you never know.
It's like sergeants,
maybe. Right. No, I'm attorneys general. I get it. I'm with you. Okay. And now the conversation that might take slightly longer. We have been asked to discuss whether we want to instruct Tom to change the name of Columbus Day on the school calendar to Indigenous Peoples Day. It doesn't need a motion, I think, right? We just have to vote and tell you to do it, or vote not to tell you to do it. So what do people think?
Well, we heard, I don't remember a formal request, but they did present their ideas. And again, you know, oftentimes when we come, and these are, I don't want to say tough decisions, but they are, they can be stressful to the town and people, and sensitive, if you will, because people don't all think the same way, as we know. So we had 5 individuals speak on the Christopher Columbus holiday. Not an outcrying like we had with the logo issue, and I'll make it very clear, it was a logo, not a mascot, because West Hartford never had mascots. And they had an opportunity to honor Indigenous people during that mascot time, when we presented that if we were to keep the logos and work with the local tribe down at each of the casinos, because that's what was presented, to come up with a educational process and a logo that was conducive to the tribes here in Connecticut, because the Native Americans is very tribal, you know, so things happening in North Dakota, Florida, Maine, they're all very tribal, and they're all very local issues. And we had an opportunity to honor those Native Americans, if we will, and by honoring them with an appropriate logo decided by some of the local leaders here that are Native Americans. We chose not to do that, but that's fine, and it is what it is. But what are we really honoring here? If we were looking at this, why don't we call it Exploration Day? You know, because there's argument that the Vikings were the first Europeans to set foot here. And as we all know, too, Amerigo Vespucci, right, am I saying that right? Vespucci, I'm sorry, is also celebrated as discovering. So I have more problem with the name that's being introduced because it's a Discovery Day. It's not a Native American or a Native Day. Christopher Columbus set out not to pillage and rape, as they said. He set out to discover and set a vision and explore. That's what he set out to do. It didn't turn out that way, we all know. But that's what was set out. And my recommendation is, because we don't have an outcry from the entire town. We've heard 5 individuals talk about this. And it's brought to the board, and I appreciate it. That's how the process works. But when we had the logo change, we had standing room only where we couldn't let any more people in. And any time that the board has decided on decisions, it's been a outcry of town members through emails. Man, not one email on this issue, not one.
Yeah, you did. I forwarded
you forwarded. It was forwarded. Yeah. Well, I've since communicated with you about that as well. So, that's my my discussion here. If we're going to celebrate, let's celebrate Discovery Day. And if we're going to celebrate, because what comes this is education, right? And we already talked about how in the elementary schools it's being taught. So that's a bonus for us, right? Because the part that when we went through the logo issue is there wasn't an educational piece that satisfied everybody, and we all talked about that block of instruction that was needed. So and if we start picking out all our history icons, if you will, when does it stop? Next week, is it going to be Washington and Jefferson? Because I sat here talking about everyone wanted me to give me, because we were talking logos. I says, give me your money, because those logos on that money represent slavery in America, right? So, but we can't dismiss something, our founders, fathers, Washington. So where does it stop? I'm saying if we change it, I say we just change it Discovery Day, but also educate on both avenues, both on Columbus, the Vikings, the Europeans that came, so I think that there's a way to do this. I think more discussion needs to take place than just having a little 21-minute discussion here from a few people and changing our calendar. I think a little more due diligence is done. This happens to be a federal holiday, and we're here to change it. But I also think we should look at other opportunities if we therefore want to change it to the name maybe that is more appropriate than Indigenous Peoples Day, such as Discovery Day. And I'm not falling on my sword on this one. I just want the discussion, it's something that, here we are sitting on a Wednesday night making a calendar change on a federal holiday that really hasn't generated a lot of discussion other than tonight.
Well, I certainly don't want this to be a conversation between the two of us. I just want to answer a couple of specific questions. The reason that I intervened before to say it's not about how many people said it is if it's an idea that people bring forward that we think is important to think about, then we bring it forward. It doesn't matter if it's one person, right, 5 people, or 100 people. So that would be my argument. There were more people behind. Again, we have rules about how many people can speak, so that's a different question. Personally, it's to say that it's really Exploration Day. It's not Exploration Day. It is a celebration of a European who comes over, claims he's discovered a place that actually already existed. So it's not a question of even if we called it Exploration Day, it is celebrating the European coming over here and its consequences. It's a little bit like saying, well, the Crusaders just wanted to get to Jerusalem. Well, we can't say rah-rah crusaders. They happened to slaughter a bunch of Jews and Muslims on the way, but hey, that wasn't their point. So I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that this is a holiday specifically designed to celebrate a particular triumph. And I think the argument on the other side is it's not so much a triumph, and we have to remember that it comes at a cost. So I'm just saying that it's not about exploration, I think. It's the argument
it's understood, but the Americas look like it, and we can go throughout history, and colonization took over the entire world. I mean, there's not almost unblemished place on the face of the earth that hasn't been colonized.
Absolutely, I'm not making that argument. I'm just saying that it's not.
What is, you can't diminish the fact that what America looks like today versus, even 60 years ago. We're a better country today than we were even 60 years ago, and we continuously to evolve, right? So, that's why I talk about Exploration Day, because what you're celebrating with Columbus is the discovery of America, although we can get in that gray area, right, of course.
The point is,
right.
It's not, that for many people it's not gray. That's exactly my point.
Well, okay. And so he wasn't out to dominate, and it was, again, exploration, and it just turned out that way. So I'm just saying that, yes, you're right, but when 5 people come up and talk about it, I would like to have seen more generated from the town, right? And if it's a federal holiday, and I know it's a school calendar, I almost think that if it's going to be a town-wide decision in our schools, is that maybe even the town council weighs in on it versus the Board of Ed, because...
And the town can. We're not, that's not, I mean, we were asked to consider the Board of Ed calendar. We were not asked to consider the town calendar. Someone might decide to ask the town council, and I would be all for that, but that's not in front of us. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but, well, I mean, I'll stop.
So I appreciate your thoughts, and I imagine your thoughts are ones that many have as well. So I'm not just going to speak directly to you, but just to the overall discussion. I think there are 2 pieces. It's one thing to encourage and recommend more discussion in terms of making an informed decision. I think it's another thing to try to rationalize as to why it's not best to go in a particular direction. And with the suggestion of renaming it as Discovery Day, I do believe that's an inaccurate word to use, because discovery implies making something aware that was unknown. We do know that the land was known. And in terms of some other historical references to be used as an example as to question changing the name, I think that also is unfair as well. So I'm all for wanting to make an informed decision, but I want to also make sure that we don't perpetuate how history oftentimes minimizes history and waters it down for the sake of whatever may be there. And especially with all of us collectively working together to advocate for our children, it's important for our children to have an accurate representation of their history, one that is not minimizing the tragedies that have certainly happened.
I don't disagree. I just, the history piece, though, I don't disagree with you at all. The history piece is taught in school. It's not taught in a calendar. The history piece is part of our curriculum, and that's where in the classroom, where it gets taught about our indigenous peoples that were here prior to that. They're also going to teach about Columbus. They're all going to teach about the Vikings and such. So that is on curriculum. The calendar doesn't teach you anything.
And I understand. I'm not implying the calendar does. However, this calendar here is a representation of the West Hartford Public School system, which is the venue that does educate our children. So it's important for there to be some congruency there.
I have a process question. If the board tonight were to ask the administration to come back with a calendar that does say Indigenous Peoples Day, that calendar would be then presented again at our next board meeting, correct? Before we actually vote on it.
It's presented either way.
Yep. And so therefore, at the next board meeting, there would be another opportunity for public comment on this topic. So if people felt strongly against this idea or for this idea, they would have another opportunity at the next board meeting before any decisions, any discussion tonight was finalized. Is that correct?
Sure.
Okay.
That's absolutely true, Deb. And In addition, they could also email the board. I mean, not everybody needs to, which you know, I'm just making
Right.
sure people are aware. Feel
Right,
free.
if the question is more town weighing in, then I think we have an honest conversation and make the best decision we can, and then we say, we welcome comments from the town to, if we're making a mistake, or if we're not, then absolutely. And that would, we could have feedback any time between now and the passing of the calendar. So absolutely, even if we vote to change it today, we could vote to change it back. If we don't vote to change it today, we could still vote to change it next time. So that's absolutely true. I still think that we should talk amongst ourselves about whether it's a good idea, whether we think it's a good idea, and then again, whatever we decide, if we get pushback, that doesn't mean we can't second guess it, but I would like to have a full conversation.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the next regular Board of Education meeting that's not devoted to the budget is March 20th. So there's a month in between this and the next meeting, just because the next meeting, the sole business item is the presentation of the budget, then there's a budget workshop, then there's a regular Board of Education meeting where this would be on the calendar.
If I could just add, the comment about where do we go next, is it Washington and Jefferson? It's a little bit more like when the South had Confederate Day, or whatever it was called. To celebrate a group that tried to pull away from the Union is not necessarily admirable. It doesn't mean we should pretend it didn't happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to support it. So that if you get rid of Confederate Day, it's not the same as getting rid of Washington's birthday, which of course they already did, but that's besides the point. So I do have to say that it's a question of accuracy and symbolism rather than, I mean, for me, the reason that I would be in favor of changing it, to be clear, is not that I think it's a solution. I think, in fact, it's symbolic, and in that sense could be totally empty. But symbolism is important, and I think if we're teaching, if we're talking about the moment when Europeans come to the United States, to the Americas, and reshape things, then that's what we're talking about. And the question is, where do we put the emphasis? Do we put it on the people like Columbus, who, whatever his agenda was, and we can differ about how noble it was, that's one perspective, the European perspective. The other is to say, as my children chanted in that song, someone was already here. And to honor that piece of it, which has not been discussed. And so to me, it is only symbolism. It is not the whole solution, but it is to me, it's an important statement about what our priorities are in terms of teaching our kids a more balanced history rather than an imbalanced one. But anyway, there are other people who had views.
Well, just just to respond, the Washington thing that you mentioned is that, we can find most people in our founders infallible, right? And if we looked at history, I don't think there's anyone that couldn't be found infallible.
Right, but we're not,
Columbus included.
Absolutely, but it's
and that's
different.
what my point was. And that's my point, is that where, at what point, where does it stop, right? And that's the only comparison I have, because I used it previously. And, it's just at some point, because you can find Washington and Jefferson, and it, at what point? And where do we rewrite history from a 2020 perspective versus?
Well, as a historian, I would say we're not actually rewriting history. We are refocusing what we're paying attention to in that history. No one is saying he didn't happen.
I'm not diminishing that, because the part that I'm proud of is that the educational piece that's taken place in West Hartford. So, and that's where I think the rubber meets the road, is that as what we're in charge of in the curriculum and what they do every day, those teachers and how they teach, our kids are getting that education and then learning it. So when I was a kid in 1492, that's all we learned. The kids today, it's much, much different. So I applaud that, and I'm not diminishing that. I really want to applaud that and echo that, because that's really what, you said, is it a symbol? But the real rubber meets the road is the education, the kids in the classroom, and they're getting the right education.
I'm going to try talking here. My hearing is just off, and I can't tell how loud I'm speaking or anything. So I often hear comments from time to time about we've only heard requests from a small group or a small number. And that strikes me as not the way we should look at everything. Just a single example that involves me. When the diesel generator at Charter Oak goes off in our neighborhood at 4 a.m. in the morning, you don't need calls from every neighbor saying this is wrong. You know, my neighbors know that I'm kind of on it, I'm going to complain about it, and they don't all feel the need to send emails about it. You look at something and it's common sense. If we have an issue brought to us by a PTO president, for example, we can have a good assurance that it's not just the PTO president speaking on his or her own behalf, but speaking on behalf of the parents, students, and the staff of the school. You know, that's one way to measure things, is the number of people who speak about something, but, you know, it's been 20 years ago since I read Howard Zinn in college. This is an issue that has been in my mind ever since. You know, it's interesting to hear other people are talking about it. I almost thought it was just me and shelved it away. So it's good stuff, but sometimes the board does need to lead instead of waiting for things to foment. I've also been to meetings at schools where false information got out and there was a big crowd and uproar and the mayor had to calm things down. It was completely unnecessary if we were able to get ahead of things on this. In this particular case, Columbus, things have already been said. I won't repeat what's been said. I don't think that's necessary. I think it's a good idea. It's only affecting the name. We're not changing the federal holiday. We're not telling the town what to do. We're putting the emphasis for our students, and I support this suggestion.
Just a couple thoughts. So I didn't mean to kind of say that a minority view doesn't count. When I said earlier, like, you know, well, if you only hear from one person, when, you know, Deb was bringing up her point, it's more that, you know, we all have our own experiences in life, and I think that's what makes the world go round. So while, you know, I may be frustrated that things happen on Brewster Road that I don't like, I'm sure Mark could care less because he can't hear it. And so I think when you have a few people that make a comment about something, and you're right, they could have a great idea, and maybe one person could have a great idea, or it could be 70 people. It doesn't mean just because one or two people have an idea that it's a good idea either. And so to the point about this holiday change, to me it's a slippery slope, because I think, you know, you look at this and you're like, well, then what else starts to change? And keep in mind that the school, I always refer back to, like, you know, do the schools have a handle on this? And I think it was in third grade that my son did they do a Native American study through their library class, because I remember being in there and having to do the returns for the books, and I was like, well, that's a hard job. So you know, they spend time with all the different, you know, they get assigned a different Native American tribe, that they learn, you know, all about the history specific to that tribe. It's extremely informative, and I enjoyed a lot learning about it as well through my son. I think it's important to note, totally separate from that, someone handed me a sheet that said the United Nations back in '94 established Indigenous Peoples Day. So it already exists. It was established for August 9th, and, you know, they spent a lot of time coming up with that. And then I think there was an update just in the last year where they said, hey, you know what, we're going to elbow in on Columbus Day, and we're going to call that Indigenous Peoples Day as well. We're not getting rid of Columbus Day. If I'm reading this right, we're not getting rid of Columbus Day, but we're elbowing in, and now we're saying we should also recognize that as Indigenous Peoples Day. So, you know, I don't know what the board wants to do. I don't think, at least based on what, you know, I've heard so far, that there's such an outcry of support that, you know, this is so important to a majority of the town. I agree with you, just not to belabor the point, like, you know, a couple people can make change, but for an issue specific to this one, I think that there should be something of significance in the town coming to us. It shouldn't be 5 people. I would like to see either a petition signed or something to the effect of where a town is 60-something thousand people. It should be more than 5 people. I think we should see something in the hundreds or thousands where people are in an uproar about this, and this is really important to them on this specific issue. To just say that a few people come in and they have valid points, and therefore we make a change as a board to the calendar, I just don't think that warrants the level of our attention. Thank you.
I think that Rob has just put the word out that we're looking for more information and more opinions from people on this. And the best way to get that, I think, is to ask that we make the change on the calendar for 1920. And I'd voice my support for that change.
Well, a lot has been said, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I am also in support of it. And I'll tell you, the reason why. There's many districts and many communities who are looking at this day. And there's a lot of discussion about moving away from Columbus Day for all of the reasons that we've already heard to Indigenous Day, and because of all of the things that were done. And how are those people who were affected represented? Where's their voice and all of the offspring that has come after those individuals? And so I think that it's warranted that we look at this and we support this issue, because it is very important, and it's also historic. We're advancing in history, and I think that it's important for our students in this town to learn that when something was done long ago and others were affected by it, that's not always accurate, and a lot of times in history, some things are missed. And we continue to teach information, but we need to teach it all, the good, the bad, and the indifferent.
It's just the message of how you want to deliver it. I think this is just a calendar. So again, to the schools and their mission and how they educate our children through history, I think they're doing a fantastic job through the different methods and practices they have in place. I don't see the significance of how this changes it. I think the general populace is oblivious to this as some sort of educational mission. By the way, as a completely unrelated aside, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. So, and maybe that's part of the slippery slope where, does that become Indigenous people Ohio? I just don't know where this is going. I mean, I think the schools do a great job of discussing explorers. My son went through that unit within the last year or so, and he had a great time with that, and they educate them. So again, the schools are doing their job. This is just a calendar. This is a federal holiday as such. I don't see why we would make that change. Thanks.
To give you this information that's updated October 9th, 2017, 57 cities in the country, 57 in the country have changed it.
Let's be 58. The problem with the slippery slope argument is, what slippery slope are we talking about? Are we talking about not calling election day? I don't know what slope we're exactly talking about. First of all. Second of all, the whole point is that it's not important. People don't think it's important because we don't even talk about it. The fact that it seems to me that it is precisely sending the signal that we want a broader understanding. No one's going to neglect Columbus, and no one's going to neglect Vespucci and right where that's already there. What's been neglected is exactly the Indigenous people's experience, and it's been neglected because people say, well, what's the big deal? This is what we're going to call it. It is a big deal. It's a big deal in the same way that we have different language now than we had before about different groups of people or different, right? They're all different. There are all sorts of things that we change because we think that the emphasis should be different. It doesn't mean that we're changing the history or negating the history. It means that we're saying that there's a different way to understand the history or what we're celebrating than the way we used to do it. So the question, you may not agree that it's appropriate to change it, but all I'm saying is that to me, again, as a historian, I take seriously the notion that we now understand things historically differently than we did. And so the question is, do the names of these days reflect how we understand them historically? And I think it's really important, personally, to say we understand that this is a much more complex question than some guy sailing the ocean blue. Do I believe he was single-handedly a rapist and a murderer? No, I think that was a little elementary school hyperbole. I get that. But that doesn't mean, so my point is not Columbus himself is not worthy to celebrate. I'm saying the whole notion that we need to put it in a different, we need to teach the discovery of America in a very different context. That's all I'm saying. And so my point is, how do we want to understand that context? I would rather not put it in terms of exploration and colonization. I would rather put it in terms of cultural interaction, consequences, things like that. And so to me, calling it Indigenous Peoples Day signals that in a way that calling it Columbus Day doesn't. Is that instead of changing curriculum? Certainly not. I'm just arguing for this as a symbolic statement of our commitment. So again, that's why I would vote to ask you to change it. But
nothing I disagree with. I mean, everything you say, again, I go back to when we had the logo issue. We had an opportunity. These same people came in here and wanted to get rid of the logo and the name and the verbiage, and we had an opportunity to honor our Native Americans. We were actually we were presenting that we work with the local Mohegans, and so that we can have a correct representation, local, and have an educational piece tied to those logos and the names, because they were really there to honor. They were never there to diminish. But yet, now they want to honor Indigenous Peoples Day differently by changing the name, where we had an opportunity to do it. So I think there's a little,
I mean, I have to say, and again, I was not up here for the logo conversation. I do know from having taught this issue in football teams that the issue is not is there a better way to talk about the Redskins that's going to honor them? No, the whole point of naming a team about that is in itself a diminishment. No, I understand. I'm just saying that, I understand. But what I'm saying is it's possible that people resisted doing it at that point because they felt that was simply endorsing a stereotyped image and papering it over. So with some kind of, but we really love you. So it seems to me that it's possible for people to say, I want it taught in an authentic way, not in a team way. I have no idea because I wasn't present.
Yeah, that's a completely different issue. We didn't have that issue here in West Hartford. We're the Warriors and the Chieftains, so completely different issue. It's just a matter of, the educational piece tied to it, right? You don't want to, it was never intended to diminish anyone, right? And yet here we are without, we changed the logos and we voted as a group to do so, and we have different ones. But I can't lose sight of the fact that, here, that was an opportunity to honor them, right? And they did not, no one wanted to really take advantage of doing that. And,
Well, and again, there were different circumstances and different people, et cetera. I just want to say that if it is the right thing to do, then it's the right thing to do, and it doesn't matter how many people are bringing it. I'm just mindful when they first started talking about whether we should have Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It was certainly not groundswells of support in many states saying, oh yes, let us honor Martin Luther King. It was a statement by people who said it is important to recognize the struggles and achievements of African American people in this country, and that's what we're going to do, because it's the right thing to do. Now, again, some people did not think it was the right thing to do, that's fine, but the point is not that Martin Luther King himself brought civil rights. The point is it is a symbolic statement about what we value in the country. And so all I'm saying is that for me, this is a symbolic statement in the same kind of way. It's not a majority vote question. If the vast majority of the town says, are you kidding, Cheryl? Put it back. Okay, I'm willing to reconsider. But for me, it's a question of morality, curriculum, and history, not majority rule petitions. So
we're making a decision here tonight to change that and then wait for the outcry instead of the other, which basically you're using my own argument against me.
Right.
Where I was like, well, we haven't had an outcry, and you're like, well, we'll change it, and then we'll wait for the outcry. So it
No,
seems
no,
that-
no, I'm saying
Hold on,
I'm
let me finish.
making
Let me finish. And also, just to answer your question about unintended consequences and slippery slope, I was never saying that then, what do we call Veterans Day? It was more like, okay, so we get rid of Columbus Day, And then what does that then say to the educators of our town about, does that somehow send them a message that they shouldn't be teaching history the same way they have in relation to Columbus and then exploring in general? And yeah, that may not happen at all, but you just don't know when you make these decisions on a board level that maybe we aren't the most informed group to decide this. And since there hasn't been a large, this came up awfully fast, and there hasn't, what's the rush to all of a sudden change this? Why not discuss it for a while? Let's see if there's more opinion that comes out of the woodwork, and then by all means make the change if there's that type of opinion. But to just make the change and then say, well, let's wait, it's the same, it's just using the same argument against me. I don't see why we're jumping to a conclusion for this one thing when, again, the educational mission hasn't changed about what we're doing in relation to explaining who the explorers were, the good, the bad, the ugly. They're doing a good job of that. There certainly is open interpretation if we want to change it on that level. I just don't think we're accomplishing anything by putting a change on a calendar. I think you're putting so much importance into that one thing on a calendar when in reality it doesn't carry the weight that you're trying to place on it. And so if you really want to effectuate change, then we should be having the discussion with the history department's supervisors about how are they going about, and I don't really want to do that because it's outside of, I think, our purview. But we certainly could ask them for an update because they're good at, we're good at getting those as far as what they're doing specifically on this unit. And if there's something that maybe we think is lacking, then going through the proper ways of thinking about how we should change that. None of that is going to be accomplished through changing this here, and I don't think we should do that here tonight.
Okay, first of all, I want to take responsibility for this because I am the chair. This did not come out of the woodwork. This was raised to me back in September, I think. What I was told at the time when I talked it over with Tom and a few other people was, now is not the time to talk about it. It's relevant when we discuss the calendar. So that's why we waited. I tried to send you guys some updates in advance of this so that it wouldn't be sprung on anybody. But if I didn't do it, if I didn't lay the groundwork far enough in advance, that's on me. That's not on the conversation. This didn't suddenly spring up. So I just want to be clear about that. That's my error.
It's not, so you're taking, it's more like for the, again, it's not about us. It's the general public, and we heard from a few folks tonight in their opinions, and they're entitled. And then we're going to make a decision. I mean, we're spending many meetings on other issues of greater weight, like school start times, as we should. I don't necessarily think that this is one that we should just make a snap decision and make a change, even if it was something that we as the board knew about earlier. I agree with that. But
right, I'm just saying it's not a snap decision. It might seem that way to people who didn't know about it, but we all knew about it. But
rest assured that the emails will come.
Yeah,
but that's fine. They're going to come either way. I don't have any problem with that.
It feels like a snap decision.
It's unintended.
So this is why I asked my process question. So we can state for the record, this is not a decision that the board would be making tonight out of the blue. This is a decision that we would be making at our March 20th meeting after almost an entire month's worth of perhaps research, hopefully input from the public. I fully expect we're going to hear from folks. And this decision isn't final until we actually vote on March 20th. So I think that's, the fairer, more accurate way to present this is to say this isn't a decision that's being made tonight. It's a decision that we'd like to put forward for our March 20th meeting.
And I understand that, but I was under the impression that, Cheryl, you were looking for a vote so that this would be the first reading and the second reading would be voted on, and the change would be in our booklet. That's your intended.
Well, right, which is, it's a little bit like the CIP conversation. We voted the first time to ask Tom and et cetera to take out the $100,000 for the thing. We didn't decide to take it out until it was out and we approved that changed budget. So I was arguing the same thing. If we think that this is the sort of thing to do, then we should do it. If we then change our minds and vote it down, then that's different. So yes, I was suggesting we make the call tonight. If you're suggesting that we not vote tonight, that's fine.
When the next reading comes.
Yeah, if I could, the function, the way the calendars used to work, just process-wise, as you said, because there were so many options, there used to be should February be 5 days? Should it be 2 days? There would be option A, B, C often brought. So just function-wise, as far as for the second reading, I don't think there would need to be a vote tonight. If you direct me to give an option A and an option B, one with it is Columbus Day, the other with it is Indigenous Peoples Day, that could be the function. Or it could, I'm just talking about process. Or you could do the same way you did the change to the second reading of the policy, where you just make the change. I move, take this out, second, vote, and then you voted on the change, and then you vote on accepting the calendar. That's the, I mean, so there's a couple different ways to do it. You don't need to have a formal vote on anything tonight, just functionally.
So
you can,
yeah. It's interesting because, this process that we're going to finally end up at somewhere is not going to be organic. This is not going to be an organic process. This is going to be, like a push-pull. Now that it's been out there and 5 people introduced it, that grassroots efforts, so it wasn't organic, it wasn't a movement to take place to.
Again, let me just interrupt you. That's not fair. 5 people spoke.
No, I understood.
Because 7 people were here.
But,
there are way more people who asked that we make this change earlier. I was just told to wait till now. So that's
But how many? But how many? Like, wouldn't it be fair to say, let's get a petition with some signatures on it?
No,
to
it's
get a
not.
sense?
I mean, you can ask, and we can certainly hear that. All I'm saying is, if it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do. If you
Just
don't
said a
think
minute-
it's the right thing to do,
Well, you're
then
saying
not.
2 different things right now. You're saying it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do, but then a minute ago you said it shouldn't matter the number. I'm just saying the number should matter. Like I said, we're a town of 62,000 people, and I do think that I'd like to hear an opinion on a greater view of 5 people, or if you've heard from people beyond that, however many it is, 10, 20, 50, like 5 people is not a decision that we should be making it on. And whether it's the right thing to do, fine, but the whole town should have more of a say. That's all I'm saying. And I don't think 5 people should create an agenda item for us.
I just want to object again. To say it's only 5 people is just wrong. It's just flat out wrong. We have rules saying the time limit and the number of people who can be here. That's irrelevant. It cannot be allowed into this conversation. That's wrong. It's wrong. I'm sorry, I'm not yet finished. It's not just 5 people. It is not just 5 people. We've heard this before. Like I said, I've heard it in the past, and it's something we should consider. But again, I'll use my example. When a generator goes off at Charter Oak, you don't need a petition at 4 a.m. You need somebody to take care of it. Here's something that comes up here. It's a different type of situation, but we don't need an outcry one way or the other. And I've been there before where things were fomented, and based on false information. And we had a big meeting, and they thought they were going to shut down a school, and that wasn't even an issue. But it got everybody to come out and do this type of thing. I don't think that it's necessary. We do have a month before we make this vote. I think the procedural idea of having an A and B calendar could make some great sense. So we're not shutting down one or the other. We would still have a vote for that. And with that, I'll let you go.
I don't understand what's wrong about there were 5 people here tonight. My point is that I'd like to get a sense of the town's opinion. 5 people are not the town. So there's nothing wrong with saying we should expect to hear from more people. Otherwise, to the whole slippery slope comment, then you could have lots of different people that are small groups come in with their issues and say that this is what we should do, when the town as a whole is either unaware or maybe not on the same page as them. And so with an issue like this, I don't think it's the same as a generator, Dave. I think they're completely unrelated issues. You're talking about a change, a substantive change to how a calendar is read. And I just, we don't need to rehash the points I said earlier, but so I'm not trying to say that it has to be this way. I'm just saying I would be curious to know how many people are really into this issue beyond the 5 that spoke tonight. Nothing wrong with the 5 that spoke, and I don't know how many, if you guys are privy to how many more people are behind those folks, then let us know. I don't have a sense of how many more people are out there asking for this change. So me, as a resident of this town, I would like to make decisions based on a majority opinion. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is if we could get a significant group of people that said this is something that I don't like, or this is something I'd like to see the board address to change, then that'd be great. That's what I'd like to know, versus just such a small group that came in tonight. So let's hear from more people.
If I may say, and I know that we have other things to attend to, and I certainly respect all that has been shared, and with reference being made to numbers and persons from the town. I certainly hear that. However, we must remember that we have been elected by the town, and they have entrusted in us to make decisions for the best interest of our young people. So we must hold ourselves accountable in that regard and have some confidence in our decision-making to be able to make rational decisions, even if topics may be a bit contentious.
I just want to make one comment about the curriculum. First of all, it's absolutely true. The curriculum is an issue that is more important than the symbolism, but they're two separate issues. The other thing is that as a board, we don't get to dictate curriculum. What we get to dictate is these questions. So we may also hope that there's curriculum around this. We could hope there's curriculum around a lot of things, but that's not where we get to weigh in. So we can certainly ask what they are doing. I think that's a totally fair question, but that's a different question. Right, that's right, but that's a different question from this one. Okay, so it sounds like if we were to take a vote, it would probably go a certain way, but rather than taking that vote, would we like to ask Tom to present us with a calendar A and calendar B? And calendar A would have Indigenous Peoples Day, and calendar B would have Columbus Day, and we vote on calendar A, and if calendar A doesn't pass, we vote on calendar B. Does that?
I believe it makes good sense.
If we flipped it, it wouldn't work, because then we might vote down both calendars, and so that we'd have no calendar. So is that way we can all, is that fair? So we are essentially postponing the final vote, but we're asking him to give us both choices so that we can take a vote next time. Is that, first of all, can we do that?
You can do that.
Is that a fair compromise about waiting to hear what other people think and developing our ideas? And
I would be in favor of that. I just have one more question about process, which is there's been some discussion tonight around how we have a 21-minute comment period prior to the board meeting, and some might be concerned that that may not be long enough for people to present their comments on this issue on March 20th prior to our vote. So do we want to make accommodations for that, or should we simply recommend that people write to us instead
So
that their opinions are able to be heard?
Yeah, every other issue that has presented this board that generated some consternation has been inundated with hundreds of emails, and I mean hundreds. So, it gets reported in the paper, Hartford Current here. No. All right, so, it gets reported and people generate opinions, and thank you, Ronnie. And so, we get hundreds of emails and they go both either way. So that's decisions that are easy to make because, yes, we represent the town, but we represent them, we hopefully represent the entire town, right? And we can't represent a few, opinions. Let's just, for argument's sake, let's just say, and I don't think this to be the case at all, but let's just say that 99% were in favor of keeping Columbus Day, and yet we're making a decision on the 1%. So that's why it's important to hear. We are entrusted to make those decisions, but we're also entrusted to be informed. We have to be educated. We can't go off just our own bias and our own opinions because you don't make good decisions that way. I can be swayed either way because I am here for the people of West Hartford. And if I see an overwhelming response one way or another, then I am now educated. And now I am making a responsible vote and not an emotional vote.
I just have to say, pardon me, I hear that. However, when we've voted on pieces like the capital improvement project, we didn't have a lineup of people speaking out on that, yet we made a decision. So again, it comes down to, yes, being informed, but also recognizing the trust that those that have elected us to make decisions that are in the best interest of our young people. We cannot just base it on numbers. It also has to be based on knowledge, competence, and again, forward thinking.
Also represents one of the few things that we actually do as a board. We vote on a budget. We vote on hiring Tom Moore, and we vote on policy. There's not a lot more that we do as a board collectively. So when it comes to the budget, we have full responsibility for that. And we also go out and do a campaign. In fact, when we got the CIP, some of us went to the schools to see where that money is being spent, to help us educate us on those. I have been in every school during CIP programs and representing. Dave and I looked at the air conditioning. So when we spoke about the air conditioning, whether to spend the $100,000, we came to the table with an educated decision. It wasn't just because we were elected and we didn't do our due diligence. We actually went to the school and was able to determine. Dave made a nice, he recognized that they had a different type of air conditioning system than any other school. So we brought it forward. He would not have seen that, nor would have I, or would we discuss it at the board had we not done some due diligence and educated ourselves and not make a blind vote.
Oops, if I could just split the difference here. I think you're absolutely right. The more voices we hear, the better. And so I hope that we end up with this sort of A and B alternative. But I do have to say that there are some things, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily one of them, but sort of structurally, there are some things that do not come down to a majority, for me. If if the majority of the town voted to bar immigrants from the schools, I would not support that. I don't care so that all I'm saying is there are questions that it seems to me come down to ethical principles. So for me, this is an ethical principle. It may not be for other people, but I just want to be clear that that's why I'm arguing, which is not to say that it wouldn't be helpful to hear what the rest of the town has to say.
So if you heard me, I just want to make it clear. I'm not arguing to keep Columbus Day.
Oh, I know you are. I know
I
that's
just want to
right.
make sure that I am arguing that we look at what the changes are if we do change it, and potentially better changes than what has been presented. That's what I want to be crystal clear that I am not one way or another. I want to hear what people have to say, and I want to hear other, if, like I said, Discovery Day, it may not be that may not be the right answer. I'm not saying it isn't, and I'm not, falling on my sword for that. I just want to hear people's, other than what we heard today. I want to hear discussions, and I want to be able to make an informed decision.
Absolutely. And again, I did not at all mean to suggest that you were making any other argument. So I think it is important to say that, again, we had quite a full and open conversation about this today. Okay. And we have plenty of time to continue discussing this. But would it be fair then to say that the solution for the moment is, as we think and gather our thoughts and talk to people, et cetera, that we ask Tom to prepare 2 calendars, both with appropriate S's and apostrophes and whatever. One that says Indigenous Peoples Day, one that says Columbus Day, one that says Columbus Day, and then that's when the vote will be. We will vote on which of the 2 calendars we prefer. Is that?
I believe it is.
I support that plan.
Okay, that's fine by me. I just want to say one last thing. I would hope, as a board, I'm still one of the new guys, but my understanding when I was elected to be on this board was, again, to take off my personal belief hat and think, in general, how do I represent the town through the Board of Ed to the best of my ability? It's not about what I believe, what I think is right. It's what does the town feel would be the best decision for this school system? And so, I don't think it's one thing to make analogies in one way, but you got to be careful when you make analogies like changing the name of a holiday to not allowing immigrants in the town. It just is one gigantic Grand Canyon leap. So again, I feel like I'm hearing from you that you're keeping your personal hat on in this room and overlooking what the town as a whole may feel is in its best interest when it comes to our education system, which I didn't think that's what we're supposed to do. No, I think as a board, we're supposed to say we're doing our best mission to make sure that we have a superintendent, who is Tom, that can do the best job to then manage our administrators and our teachers, and therefore they can teach the best to their ability to make the kids have the best outcomes they can have. And so I just strongly disagree that you're wearing your individual opinions on issues to say that this is what I think is best. I just think differently, and I don't think that's what our mission is.
okay, to me, I hear you. To me, my opinion, my personal opinion would be like, well, my kids think this, or my school this. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I have principles, and you have principles, and there are some principles that should not be swayed by majority, 51%, whatever. That's why we were elected. I happen to think this is a matter of principle. So if you don't, then that's fine. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying, for me, it's not a question of my personal hat. My personal hat is to act as an ethical person who is also a trained historian. That's all I can do. I don't want to vote against something that I believe structurally, which is different from saying, do I think the calendar should be March 2nd or March 3rd for whatever, right? That's not a principal question for me. That's a majority question. So I just think that there's a distinction between acting on what you believe as a principle and acting on what you believe because it would be good for Whiting Lane or whatever. So I see a distinction there. But I understand that this one is not that for you, and that's fine. We can just have different priorities.
That's fine, but I don't think, no, and this is just an example. This calendar happens to just be an example. So it is a larger issue to me in that I think that, again, you're not supposed to, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but, I've been on other boards, and you walk into the room as a board member, you're supposed to take your personal beliefs, your personal interests, and that goes back to nepotism that we just talked about tonight, that you're supposed to be acting in the best interest of the town. So it has nothing to do with your principles versus my principles. Is this a decision that is in the best interest of the town? Period. End of story. That's how I feel. From what I'm hearing from you is something different.
I have to say, I think we need to move on. I don't think I think we should move on. I don't think it's, from what I heard that this is a concern that, yes, we heard today, but we also know it's a concern that has extended back, and voices have been shared about this concern. So we welcome you to please email and communicate your thoughts. We certainly want to welcome your views on this subject.
Okay. Have we even... Oh, well, we just accepted it. We don't have to vote again. Okay, let's move on to the superintendent's report. We have way more to go, guys.
I got a lot of things to... No, I'm just... Okay, so a couple good news, and then I do want to address our school security just in general. But a couple good news stories. And this one's a very unique one. We got this communication from Trevor Packer, who oversees the Advanced Placement Program for the College Board. Internationally, on the Advanced Placement Research course, which I would point out that we were the first public school in New England to pilot this course. It's been operating for a while, and our teachers are well recognized for their expertise in this course. There were 176 perfect scores internationally on this exam. 5 of them were awarded to students from West Hartford. 4 from Hall, 1 from Conard. It's validation not just for our students, but also our teachers with the work that they're doing, and it's a truly tremendous achievement. So my hats are off to those students. And I'd give their name, but I'm not allowed to release their exam scores. So that would inherently be a problem. More good news. I think I mentioned in October, West Hartford had 4 National Merit semifinalists from West Hartford, 3 from Conard, 1 from Hall. So we flipped the 2 things, so it's perfect. 3 from Conard, 1 from Hall, and all of them have now officially been named as finalists as of last week, and they are National Merit Scholars. So congratulations. This represents the top less than 1% of American high school seniors. And one of the interesting things that's different about this is you actually get a composite score, and then it's done by the top percentage in your state. So Connecticut, with Illinois, New York, and Massachusetts, and Maryland are the states that are by far the most difficult, with a composite score of being above 220 as opposed to 200 in some places. So it's a huge achievement. So congratulations to Sora Chang, Katie Kopp, Doug Olmstead, and Jack Moore, who I know.
The Jack Moore?
The Jack Moore, yes, yes. So, congratulations to them. That is a great achievement. Now, so I sent an email to parents because I believe I sat at that table 5+ years ago, right after Sandy Hook, and I talked about what we were doing, and we made changes to our building security. And at that point, and since then, you'll notice this in things that a lot of people have said, there are elements that I won't talk about when it comes to security. There are plans I won't talk about because that's how you keep things safe and secure. But I did make the decision last week to send a letter out to all families so that there was an understanding that we plan for worst case scenarios and that it's something that keeps us up awake constantly. We're talking about lack of sleep in some ways tonight. I can promise you that is evident in my household over the past week because I take the safety of my own 2 children and all of your children and all the people in this town very seriously. And I tried to get across in the letter, we do all we can, and we truly plan for the worst case scenarios. Since I sent the letter out, I've been asked to speak on almost every media outlet there is, and specifically one of the things people wanted to talk about were our trauma kits, because we are ahead of the curve in that. And that's with so much of our work here goes thanks to Andy Morrow and Eric Dempsey, who we hired as our Director of Security and is a superstar. He was in Massachusetts presenting on this topic today. And so he brought that in with partnership with West Hartford Police. I presented so many times with Tracy Gove, who has moved on, is no longer our police chief, but Dan Coppinger, who's acting now as the town's in search of their new police chief, we meet with constantly. So, am I doing enough? Which would be the question. I have a tremendously talented staff who works every day, both for mental health and for safety. And boy, there's times I think I'm asking too much of them. I had included in the budget before this happened extra positions to support mental health. Those remain. To the question, what more can we do? I'll be honest with you. If you said hire 40 more social workers, those 40 more social workers would be used, as would 40 more reading specialists, as would 40 more everything. We have a responsibility to try to have that balance, to try to have security. Because one of the other things that's come out of the woodwork in the past week, if I might be blunt, is sleaze. And that goes from people talking about kids that are speaking out and 250,000 Americans sharing that these are crisis actors, not real kids. To, I talked to area superintendents, we've had at least 10 area schools with threats put in, most of the time not even by people in this state, just internet threats that come out. And then we have profiteers who come forward. I've seen some interviewed on TV as if they're just a random security consultant saying, why isn't everybody doing this? Isn't safety worth $100 a child? Isn't safety? All those things, of course they are. We have an expert in Eric Dempsey and our partnership with the police department that goes through what are we doing? Are we doing enough everywhere? What I have to say, I hate saying, we can do everything we possibly can, but we still have bus stops. We still have recess. We still have PE classes. We have release and entrance. We have 3,000 people at a sports event. This is a reality that disgusts me. It frightens me, but it's something I give you my word, we are working on constantly. At the end of every year, we do a detailed presentation, not just on school safety, but on security, if new things are coming up. As I mentioned in the letter, we've spent over $1 million on enhancing security. We have plans that you saw in the CIP that we discussed just last week. This isn't something that, oh no, now we better do something. That's what I want to assure people of, is that this is something we're thinking about all the time. It's not that we shouldn't do more. It's not that we shouldn't do differently, because I have had a lot of ideas brought to me by people in the past week. The email I sent out I've received like 160 something emails back from parents. Most just thanks for letting us know what's going on. That really is, but there are certainly ideas, and I direct those people to Eric. By all means, talk to Eric about this. How can we do this? But I did want to address to all of you that this is something we're thinking about constantly. Any specific questions, we can talk about more if there's I already have it on the calendar as a presentation. But I just wanted to let you all know our security staff, our mental health staff, our police force, our administrators. Tomorrow we're going to be having a long meeting with our administrators. This will be a topic. One of the things people have brought up nationally, and different superintendents have responded differently. What about student walkout? What about student protest? What about listen, I'm a history teacher. Students being involved in something, nothing excites me more. But here is the reality of that I want to make sure people know, because we're probably going to ask people, and people say, well, why would you do that? So, Julio Duarte and our principals may send home a letter saying, if your child's going to engage in the walkout, please just write us a note. And some would say, well, that's not a true walkout. I just urge people to remember we're responsible for students when they're in school. And I know I've had people ask me, what about, are you chaperoning the elementary students out? No, that's not appropriate. We need to make sure we are charged with their safety during a school day. And so I just want to make sure people don't mistake when we're asking for a parent permission. We need to know where people are. That doesn't mean we're going to be tackling people that are trying to leave the building. That doesn't mean we're going to be giving 5-day suspensions to kids. We've been through this before. I was principal of Connor, and there was a walkout in 2007. This is not anything new necessarily to us. It's just something I want people to understand, that we've got to make sure we're going through due diligence to make sure there's a safe place. Because there's also questions about, is everybody leaving at the same time everywhere? That's a question people would ask, and so we'll provide locations, we'll provide security, we'll be around where kids will be. But I just wanted to address that without finalized plans yet, because we haven't had the chance as a leadership team to discuss it either. So.
One thing I would ask is, I really appreciate everything that you said. One piece that I feel like I know less about is the mental health piece. And so I wonder if at some point you guys might be willing to do a presentation on how we are bolstering kids so that this doesn't happen, and providing peer-to-peer support for kids who are having problems. All those questions, if you wouldn't mind.
No, absolutely. And Gretchen, because you're right, this is a two-pronged approach. It's not just an Indy report on security. It's also Gretchen talking about what can we do. Because, listen, people will always say, are you doing enough? I live in fear of having to defend myself. Okay, and I live in fear of having been wrong. We eliminated 17 staff positions last year. If people said, would you add a ton? Well, I wouldn't if I was firing those people next March. Because that's a reality of, we know budgets go in cycle from a horrible year, not so bad, then a horrible year. We don't know what the state situation's going to be. And so, we want to do things with a plan. That's not to say we wouldn't hire anybody, certainly. It's just a question of, we want to make sure that we're doing all we can to be responsible. I think Gretchen talks about this daily. Dr. Gretchen Nelson, our Director of Pupil Services, changes plans. She changes structures. She changes procedures, which can be difficult for people because not everybody loves change. But really to try to make sure we're efficient in the biggest manner we can. Right now, what we depend on, what I put in the letter, is we depend on our kids. so that if Grace and Maddie know somebody that they're worried about, they let us know. We depend on, you all know, I've shared a story with you where something was posted about me that was threatening. How did we find out? A kid came forward to his dad, and his dad called the school. Those are the things we have to do. And we have to look out for each other, and we have to treat each other with decency. The best thing that has happened in my past 10 years, I think so much of the stigma of a kid talking about their friend to a school counselor, to a teacher, and saying, I'm worried about my friend, much of that stigma has been removed. And it happens far more, which is why we have so many more referrals, which is why we need so many more staff members. Because every time I talk about special education spending, sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that's just about our identified students. Our school psychologists don't get to check with the student and say, wait, you're not special ed, I'm not going to talk to you today. So it's really this element of all mental health. It's a long answer to say I'm happy to have Gretchen talk to us about it. I'm happy to address that more. I'll just need to look at the calendar and discuss with you about when.
Thanks. Other questions? Okay, well, these have been very controversial times, and so let's move on to something completely uncontroversial, rethinking school start times. Update from, I think, Ann McKiernan and Paul Vicinis. Oh, and more.
Yeah. Let me introduce everybody that's here. Not that you don't know everybody, but I'm not sure if you haven't all met Jason yet. So Paul Vicinis, Ann McKernan, who has overseen this work, and Ann has spent so much time on this and so much expertise and has become an expert. And really I want to commend her for a job well done on a topic that I think you all know, that all we're trying to do in the presentations, and I tried to remind you of that, is we're just presenting what we find to you. This isn't because I think sometimes people are like, well, you're presenting that, you must be in favor, but you're presenting that, you must be against. No, this is just what's out there, what we've talked about, what the research has found. Jason Siegel, our athletic director, so much of this, we can't pretend that there would be no impact, because athletically, there are questions, and Jason's talked to athletic directors. Jason Siegel, if you hadn't had the chance to meet Jason yet, this is his second year in West Hartford, and I am confident in saying he is one of the best hires I've ever made. And Julio Duarte, our principal of Conard, I can't say the same, but
Good evening, everyone. We are here tonight to present our second update to you. This is the second in a planned three-part update to the board to give you the background that you will need to make a decision on this issue. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge many of our staff, our committee members are in the audience. I ask them to stand up. I know the screen is a little bit in your way, but we have with us Sean Passon of Hall High School, Shoshana Lazuski is here, Andy Mayo is here, parent Jennifer Boyd is here, Corinne Harrington, I think, had to leave a little bit earlier. I saw her, and I'm not sure if I'm missing any others, but our committee is 22 people. They worked very hard, and they're all making a tremendous amount of contributions to effort. Mr. Siegel and Mr. Duarte are on the committee as well. So I wanted to take a moment to point out their good work. Before we begin with our new information, I'd like to remind us where we were on December 5th. We came to you on December 5th, and we focused primarily on sleep research and gave you a little bit of background on who's on the committee. And at that point, we were able to share many of the benefits that is found in the research. Our committee echoed everything that we've heard from the American Medical Association, the Center for Disease Prevention, and many other organizations. And those were, in a nutshell, adolescents need over 8 hours of sleep, and that their sleep cycle changes as they get older. And it's harder for them to go to bed. And most of those factors are biological. There are some environmental, no doubt, but they are mostly biological. So there's a compelling amount of research to say that there are a lot of positive outcomes for changing some school start times to accommodate these later wake times. And one of the reasons I want to start with that review is tonight you're going to see many challenges too, and we were tasked with presenting benefits and challenges. So I wanted to set the stage so that when you hear these challenges, you realize it is you're hearing all parts of this this work. So we're going to. I'm sorry, it's not showing me what it's showing you. Tonight, 4 of our subcommittees are going to be providing you information. So first we have a subcommittee on lessons learned, and Mr. Passon led that work. They did a tremendous amount of outreach to Newtown, to Greenwich, to Wilton, and they've called other school districts. We've read a lot of reports. We've read a lot of publicly available information, and I can't tell you the amount of hours I've spent on other boards' websites reading board reports that were made much like what we're doing here tonight. Athletic impacts was primarily led by Mr. Siegel, and he will be providing a lot of detailed information for you. We had additional requests from this board to comment on academic impacts, and we will do that. And then finally, we'll end tonight with some information about what our stakeholder outreach efforts are. So before I go on, I want to show you a small inset map of Connecticut, which shows you the districts that have currently made this change. Now, the districts that have made this change implemented at this point in this state, public school, are Greenwich, Wilton, and Newtown. Wilton being the most experienced with about 15 years of experience. He did this in 2003, I believe. Newtown made the change this year. Greenwich made the change this year. And we've reached out to all of them. I circled Greenwich and Newtown in red because those are the districts we got a great deal of information back from, probably because it's very fresh right now in their minds. One of the things we learned in this process is that locations and geography make a big difference. So although many of the challenges are common, some are quite unique. I was impressed to find out unique things about Newtown or Greenwich that are impacting their decisions, and a lot of them then impact the small details. So each situation is a little different. So I'm going to start with Newtown. Thank you. Paul will be my over-the-shoulder checker here. Newtown made this change. After 1 year of study, they moved their high school start time to 8 o'clock. They also moved their middle school start time to 8 o'clock, and their intermediate start time went out 1 hour, and they did not change their elementary schools. So I believe their elementary is a K2, and their intermediate's a 3-5 school. They did this with the goals of increasing time for adolescent sleep, minimizing disruptions to family schedules, ensuring reasonable bus ride times, keeping their costs neutral, minimizing impact on after-school activities. Those were some of the stated goals they were trying to achieve during the process. A couple special notes about Newtown that are just more interesting is they're almost 60 square miles. And they have 4,000 students. So if you think about it, it's about triple the size of West Hartford geographically and 40% of this population. So bus rides for them were very, very challenging because of the more rural nature. So that was just kind of an interesting thing. But for them, transportation became probably their number one issue. With that, some of the lessons we learned in talking to them, and Sean actually visited, had panel discussions with represented parents, students, teachers, administrators, did a phenomenal job of leading that work. And some of the things we've learned, that did not work. Did it work? Thank you. Okay, so the first thing we learned is the students are reporting more sleep. So that goal was achieved. They also report they would not change back. The students were surveyed once the change was in place, and they reported they would not make that change back. Their parents are reporting that they also see more sleep in their school-age children. Most parents are reporting that they are pleased with the change. There have been some concerns in the elementary level. Bus rides are quite long there. I believe they were trying to keep all bus rides under 55 minutes. It's quite long. Yes. They also had to implement, they used to have 3-tier busing system, and they've been able to collapse to 2, but it's almost 2.5 because they run a shuttle bus between their intermediate and elementary. And that had some concerns with parents shuttling back and forth. So there has been some concerns among how they are implementing for elementary. The staff, many are in favor. There are some concerns from staff about this. And one of them is the crunch time in the afternoon, being able to provide additional extra help for students because the afternoon was crunched a little bit. As we mentioned before, transportation was their biggest logistical issue and their bus ride times. They continue to make small adjustments and anticipate another 5-minute adjustment next year in between their intermediate and elementary school times. Some of it was coverage, staffing coverage, contracts, all of that kind of issues. They make small adjustments as we go. When it gets to athletics, they reported they have more than one lit field. Now, they have one high school, but they have more than one lit field in town, which is alleviating some of the pressure. There are some, despite more lit fields and some of their best planning, they do still have to release some students early to attend games. They're getting some cooperation from their league, and when I say cooperation, you will reach out and ask schools to start later. But they also have to do what's in the best interest of their children. So some are able to, some are not, and some do it at times. They said to us that they would have put more time into looking at the impact in their non-school owned facilities, where they have to either rent space or they use common spaces. And finally, one of the biggest impacts they saw in athletics is they've really, really reduced their warm-up times. That has caused some concerns because we know our athletes need to stretch out, they need to be ready to play, or we could see increases in injury. And they are down, in some cases, to 5 and 10 minutes of warm-up time. Not all, by any means, but it is something to consider, that impact too. How do we crunch some time but yet still provide adequate warm-up times to keep our students safe? So those were some of our biggest lessons from Newtown. We turned our attention then to Greenwich. And Greenwich had different changes. They went from a 7:30 high school start time to an 8:30, and they moved their middle school out a half an hour. Right now, they're continuing to study their elementary schools. They are not saying that they won't change them, but they want to keep that under consideration. They had a 1-year study much like ours. They decided to make the change and then did a 1-year implementation committee that worked out all the details. They actually hired a project manager and had representative committees in every aspect of this work, and they implemented just this school year. In reading their publicly available documentation, and we have not visited, but in reading what's available, there are letters to their parents and some of their board reports. There are some transportation challenges there that have caused some significant adjustments. They've had to add buses during the time. They've communicated to their parents that they will continue to monitor the situation and make the needed adjustments as they go on. They seem very committed to collecting a lot of data. That would be wise for us to learn about. They did a sleep survey, a pre and post sleep survey for their students to see what that reveals. They're doing pre and post stakeholder surveys. They have academic impact review that they're interested in learning if academics is being positively impacted, and they're looking at their learning times and how that's being impacted. In the area of athletics, they have had a good number of dismissals. They had to put a dismissal policy in place, how many times a child could leave in any one season, and that has resulted in missed class time. They have been in the paper talking about the mitigation factors they've put in place to ease some of that change. They've had to add some buses to practice sites off-site, and this gets particularly difficult from about the first week, second week of October on. And we spent some time studying sunset times and civil twilight time charts, which showed us that from October 11th to the end of the fall season, the sunset starts about 6:15. So they are challenged. that's a hard stop. You can't move that back. They are conducting a feasibility study to determine if they can maintain all of their teams and all of their levels of competition. That was a question going into this first year, and they decided to maintain all levels of competition. That's varsity, JV, and freshman, and all teams. But that's continuing to be under review if they can maintain that. And they have a study with Malone and McBroom to look at an additional lit main field with lights that would shine on a third field. They have a stadium field, and they're studying a second stadium-type field with lights that would share onto a third practice field. So they are looking at extending their use of lights. And those are the main things that we've learned along the way. It's been great to talk to them and understand some of the finer points of this work.
I think it's safe to say, and not to interrupt, but Greenwich has had a little more tumult with this, and I think it's just to put that out there directly. And I don't want to speak for Greenwich, but this is still something. I included communication with families. You can see that this is continuing. There's still, this is still in processing Greenwich more, I would say.
I would concur in what we're reading, and certainly looks, and I invite you to read anything you can on their implementation. They are challenged by their location. They're bordered by New York, so every ride's pretty long for them, but they seem to be having some challenges. With that, I'd like to turn it over to, when we get to our athletic impact discussion tonight, you're going to see some challenges, as you've kind of heard from the other districts. And I would just suggest that this is our starting point for a discussion. This is not like the end point of our discussion, but we want you to be well aware of what we're finding in the athletic impact. So I turn it over to Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. The first slide is just to give you some perspective on who's involved in our athletic program, as you may or may not know. So, and these numbers combine both high schools and look over approximately a 3-year average. I just didn't want to give you last year's numbers because those numbers fluctuate year after year. So I did it, we looked at a 3-year average. So we have just over 1,600 student athletes here in West Hartford at the high schools. To give you a little bit more perspective of that number, roughly 290 of those student athletes participate in 3 or more sports, or 3 sport athletes. Just over 550 students are 2-sport athletes, and just over 800 students play 1 sport. So we have about half of those students participating playing more than 1 sport. As we'll get to in another slide or two, when we talk about the potential loss of instructional time, about half of those students are going to receive or be exposed to a lot more instructional time lost than others. We have combined at the high schools just over 121 teams. Now that's across all sports, but that also consists of the varsity, JV, and freshman programs that we offer our students. Not every sport has all 3 teams, but most do. We have about 150 coaches that coach our student athletes throughout the school year. And at Conard, out of the 75 coaches, 37 of them are also teachers in the district, and at the different levels. At Hall, out of the 83 coaches, 32 are teachers in the district. So, as we're charged with looking at the impacts of any shift in scheduling, it not only impacts a large number of student athletes, it's going to impact a large number of our, what I'll call, teacher coaches that play both roles. And finally, we have, between the 2 high school campuses and a few of the town facilities, we have about 11 competition and practice locations that our kids use throughout all 3 seasons. Some of the challenges that, we looked at based on our present situation, present condition with our school time now, and what this could possibly mean moving forward. One of the biggest ones that is important to me is loss of instructional time. And I think, every time we take our students out of the classroom or taking that coach out of the classroom, might not necessarily affect student athletes in their room, but other students who are not athletes who are now without their regular classroom instructor. So, that is something that we're going to have to take a close look at. In the next slide, it'll break it down a little bit more of what does that mean as far as loss of instructional time. Secure later start times for away competitions. I would love to sit here and say that of the 31 CCC schools that are in our conference, that all 31 CCC schools and all of their teams would happily agree to change their home start times when we travel to them. We work very well together, but I can't sit here and tell you for certain that all those start times that are typically 3:45 are now going to change to 4, 4:15, 4:30.
And if I could, this isn't just because, they're being jerks. There actually is a reason, because from the end of the school day until the beginning of the sport, students without their cars aren't going home. They're still on campus.
Right.
And so it's the idea of who's monitoring the campus after all the teachers have gone home. Okay, what are those kids doing? So so there is a reason. They're not just being obstinate if they say, no, they're not adjusting it.
And to the point of them not being jerks about it, I did speak with several ADs, and there are quite a few schools in our conference that even though they have first right to their school sites, because they offer such large youth programs, that they actually have to be off those sites by certain times. So they're kind of handcuffed, if you will, to have to play by a certain time, have to get the game started by a certain time. Another challenge is to identify the impact of the early dismissal for our teacher coaches, again, which I spoke about. We have a large number of teacher coaches in the district. One of the things we'd have to look at is determine availability of non-school facilities, which we use a few of the parks in town, but one of the things we may have to explore is using more of those parks or additional parks in town to kind of to provide those practice areas and possibly lower level gameplay for our teams that we typically wouldn't use now. And once we start moving kids off campus, in turn comes bus transportation, in turn comes increased costs potentially there. Impact on participation. It's no surprise in athletics that some sports have to make some tough choices at the beginning of the season and limit participation numbers, as we refer to them as cuts. We try not to do that as often as possible. One of the challenges we could possibly be looking at is limiting not only the number of participants on a team, but perhaps, especially at the lower levels of the JV and freshman teams who often don't play on lit facilities, limit the number of games that they actually play, especially later in the season. So that's a challenge that we might be faced with. Increased use of fields for night games with lights. The town currently has a policy in place, not West Hartford Public Schools, but the town has a policy in place with regards to light usage. High schools are allowed to play no more than 36 contests in the fall under the lights. Currently, both high schools are just beneath half of that, so we're in pretty good shape there, but I do see that number rising to the point where we might exceed that. It's hard to tell at this point, but I do see the light usage rising in that respect. In the springtime, each high school is allowed 16 night games under the lights. Again, similarly, we are right now about a little less than half of that light usage. So we're still in a ballpark which, with the town policy, we should be okay with. But I do see those numbers increasing with the change in our school dismissal time.
Jason, quickly, does that include the town, not the high school? Does that include the town?
No, I don't know of any. And again, forgive me, it's on my second year.
I was a part of that. No, the town has separate limits. That I think they have, I want to say, 8 total night games that they can play at the schools. They have a separate number than the high schools.
Cumulative?
No, we have a number, and so what Jason gave is our number. We can have 36 contests in the fall, and I think town can have, I want to say 8, but I could be, don't hold me to that number.
Sorry, when you say town, what are you referring to, town rec leagues?
Yeah, youth soccer league or youth football league or youth field hockey league. Typically, all of the town leagues tend to have one night event at the schools now with the lights at the fields.
So just for clarification, in the fall, the town is allowed 16 dates, 16 nights under the lights, and in the spring, 8. And the last one, last challenge that we put in there is very real, and that's availability of officials. Should we move our game times off of 3:45 to even 4 o'clock? There's such a shortage of officials, and I can safely say in most sports throughout this state, that they're oftentimes double booked pretty regularly. So they'll do a 3:45 soccer game and then have to shoot across 3 or 4 different towns to try to get to a 6 or 7 o'clock game. So I envision some challenges with the officials boards in moving our home start times especially. We have more control with our home times. I don't see our home start times for games and matches being so much of an issue. What's really concerning to me is where we don't really have the control of other people's facilities. And the league has a rule where, you can change off the standard 3:45 start time, a lot of night games. So we agree to play them at 6 o'clock. If schools can't come to an agreement, by default, it goes to 3:45, and that's a league policy of which we're part of. So there's that piece there too. The next slide, again, these dismissals represent present conditions. If the school day was to be extended by 30 minutes or 60 minutes with no mitigation to what's in place now. So again, on average, we have just over 1,600 athletic contests across all 3 levels of a program, freshman, JV, varsity, throughout all 3 seasons. With our current scheduled end time of 2:15 at both high schools, what I did is I looked back at this past fall, last spring, and last winter to give us a full year of athletic scheduling, and approximately 23 times we let kids leave early and coaches early from the school day. And those are primarily due to state tournaments, conference tournaments that the CIAC dictates, the CCC dictates. There were a handful of occasions where maybe the past winter, especially with snow delays and cancellations, where you have to get creative in your scheduling, and sports like ice hockey, where you're at the mercy of ice rinks and time slots, we really don't control those, so we may had to allow students to leave early for some contests in sports like that. Swimming is another one. As you can see, we gave our what I expected to be, worst case scenario with no mitigating factors applied to a 30-minute and a 60-minute delay. And again, those are largely due to away contests. Right off the bat, we can ask other towns to help us out and change start times to later start times for our contest, so we're not getting out as early. Again, I can't promise every school we play will agree to that. I think most will, but the closer we get, the further out we get with our school end time, I see the rise in that number of early dismissals. Conard has the luxury of being right on the highway, and Hall does not. And by car, it can often take 15 minutes to get to a highway from Hall. So just imagine with the big yellow school bus, it's depending on a myriad of factors, what could delay that getting to the highway. So you'll see the lower numbers with early dismissals, largely due to Conard being right on top of the highway. Hall, again, doesn't have that luxury. One of the things I want to point out is with regards to practices. I talk a lot about early dismissals and loss of class time. Right now, the majority of our practices in the fall and spring begin around 2:45, 3 o'clock. And with school getting out at 2:15, well, why aren't they practicing right at 2:30, 2:20? Well, the coaches kind of have amongst themselves no policy, no written rule that says, you know what, we're going to start at 2:45, 3 o'clock. I want you to go to see your teachers. I want you to get some work done. I want you to go ask some questions about an assignment, go make up a quiz, go make up a test, what have you. They have that time built in currently. I foresee that time either being greatly reduced or potentially wiped away the later our end time is on the school day. And to me, with kids being involved in so much, losing even just 20 minutes to go talk to a teacher is going to be a loss. That's it. Questions?
Particular slide. Do you have more?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Well, we have more,
right, but this slide,
specific to athletics.
I just want to understand the 23 early dismissals for the current schedule, 200 to 220, 252. That's not 23 early. That's not 23 students.
No, that's 23.
23 opportunities, yeah. Because I know just for exactly one sport, there was 3 times that many just for one sport in one day. So I just want the crowd to know that.
That's not students, that's
a good point.
competitions, those are events.
Yeah, these are different events, so
23
that day,
times the athletes.
There were 23 times where a team had to be dismissed early to participate in an event throughout the year.
It's not students.
Yeah. And one of the things I think, before anybody says it, because Jason's in the unenviable task of having to present, these are the challenges. Because everybody's basically talked about the benefits. I don't want people to think he's against this, he's presenting the challenges.
We were charged with, if this happens, what do you forecast is changing and happening, and that's what we're presenting. I am. Or
I was just going to, you want to go? I just want to make 2 connections to the lessons learned piece. One is Newtown was very clear with the non-school facilities, and there are a couple that are special. For instance, Cornerstone. Cornerstone is a fee-based facility, and we cannot tell them much about how they survive. You know, they're not Google, they're not bringing in tons of money. They're surviving on their fees and the use of other things. So that is one example that may be hard, very hard. The golf course is another one. You can imagine there are men's and women's clubs that come in after work, and these children need to be on and off. And I would just say, even right now, again, not an unsurmountable challenge, but a very real challenge is current golf tee times are 3 o'clock. They're not 3:45 or 3:30. So moving that may be very, very difficult. There's boys teams, there's girls teams, there's varsity, there's JV. The other point I wanted to, I think this comes from the connection to Greenwich, is this, in the 60-minute, when it comes to away games, that's more than one, in our current schedule, that is more than one period. A period, Julia, is 45, so that is a period and a third, if they need to leave an hour early. So I just wanted to make the connections where we are learning. Newtown said they would have put a little more time into, they put plenty of time into their transportation, it's worked out pretty well, but they would have put more time into some of these other things like non-school facilities, and I think Greenwich they've made some changes in their schedule mid-year because of the loss of time. So just wanted to connect those 2 for you.
if I may as well, I gave you the numbers of our multi-sport athletes for a reason, and with our current bell schedule, they would be missing the same last period 8, every time they have to leave early for a game. Potentially some of the last piece of the 7th period. But so again, I just want to make that point where it's, they're missing that same class, and that's for those multi-sport athletes, that's going to be a lot of class periods not receiving that instruction. So again, that's another challenge that we face.
Question on athletics. I think given increased costs, lack of control over facilities that we don't own, and the officials' challenges, this probably wouldn't work, but I'm wondering if Newtown or Greenwich moved any of their games to Saturdays. or Sundays?
I don't want to say yes or no, so I don't want to, because I didn't look specifically at that, but that is something I can look very easily with.
Yeah, we currently use,
So
we currently use Saturdays already. It's not a non-game day. I just want to clarify that. But I know they moved some of their football.
Sean just
especially,
informed me
yeah.
that Newtown moves to some Saturdays, but I can't confirm whether Greenwich did or not. You're welcome.
Can I ask a similar question about, I understand these are real issues that we can vote to go ahead, but then these are things we have to deal with. I understand that. But with the Newtown and Greenwich experiences, how many games were they able to change? I mean, in other words, in reality, if a third of the games were changed, then we're not looking at 250 misses, we're looking at 180 misses. Or, do you see what I mean? This is assuming no change. How much success did they have making some changes that would actually have lowered that number?
Without being able to give you an exact number, I will say that initially they received a large amount of support from the league schools that they participate against. Over time, that support changed, and for a variety of reasons, but they found many more challenges as the fall season went on when asking those teams to help them out and change their start times. So
I'm going to add 2 or 3 more points on that. One is, in the fall, there's only so much you can do. You can only go out so far because the sun is going to set. And so that is one of the factors, is they can only cooperate so much. They have to think about what's best for their children, getting back for their night things and their homework, as well as shared fields. There's a lot of considerations. There was another point, Wilton. We did not get, we weren't fortunate enough to talk in depth to people in Wilton, but just last week I saw an announcement at CABE was holding a school start time presentation, and Wilton was there. So last minute I got myself over to CABE to listen, and Wilton was there. And one of the things they said is that they initially got some level of cooperation and have enjoyed that, some level. I don't know what that translates to in numbers, but the Wilton superintendent said at the meeting, they've been told recently it's been a hardship on these other schools, and some may be backing off of that. Not, again, they're giving them fair warning, but it's been a hardship on their districts, and they need to do also what's in the best interest of their children. I found that kind of interesting because it's been in place a long time there. So it is a legitimate question, a good question to ask. How much can they really do? They can seemingly, there'll be some level of cooperation. We can try to research more about how many were moved. And we're going to go on to our Academic Impact Subcommittee, and this one is a challenging one. And I really struggled with how to present this in the report and in this slide, and Paul actually helped me out quite a bit, because what we're finding here is we read the research, and we can only read a small piece of it. There are literally thousands of articles on this topic. So our group read quite a bit and found a couple of studies that say there's a causal effect between later school start times and improved academic outcomes. And then there were a number of studies that says there's a relationship. It seems to be that later school start times may result in improved either grades. And you can understand why this is difficult. I mean, different grading schemes, different courses taken, different standardized tests, changes in kids over time, need for longitudinal information is very, very difficult. And so it's hard for us to really convey exactly or make any promises. But one, again, at that Wilton presentation last week at CABE, I really liked their approach, because what they said is, the question came, have you seen in these 15 years, have you seen an improvement in academics? And they said, we didn't make the change for that reason. We are a high-performing district. We did not make the change for that reason. We can't tell you if there are improvements. There may be some. But that wasn't our focus. Which I thought, in some ways that may be the best way to sum it up. Because you can read these studies and it looks like correlations, but it does, and again, then you'll read a causal and you're looking, is there more? But at the end of the day, I think Wilton says it's not the most important factor. They made the decision for other reasons, and they are a high-performing district. And so I did include in your report some of the studies we read, and we did read many. But the best I can tell you is that there generally seems to be a good quality of, improved quality of life. And I can also say there's no reports that we read that said grades go down and things get worse for children. We didn't find anything in the research that said there'd be a negative impact. So we know we had additional questions on that. I hope that helps you a little bit. But it's very hard to pinpoint this in the research as well as what our districts are telling us. It seems like Greenwich wants to continue to try to study that, and if they find things, we will certainly share them with you. And finally, we'd like to talk about our stakeholder work. I'm really excited here because our stakeholder committee came together and we started to look at all the different kinds of surveys from Newton, Mass, and from all over. We talked to Simsbury about what they had done. And, Tom Moore is very good at sending us Hanover research studies. He sends them to us on different topics of interest. So I thought, I'm going to call Hanover Research and see if they can help us. And they said, absolutely. We will help you design a survey just for West Hartford. And you can have impact. It will be a process. And because we're in the consortium, it is not a cost to us. And they will analyze the results for us. The one negative is that it pushes our survey window, which I had hoped originally for in March to May. But when we looked at how all this could come together with our final board report, a very timely survey results, and a parent information night or family information night we'd like to run on May 3rd, we thought that could all come together for you as you are doing your final considerations of this work. So our stakeholder impact subcommittee is working with Hanover to finish, and I have the copy already, a draft of it that we're working on. There'll be a parent, a secondary school, student survey, and a staff survey. And they all range from about 20 to 24 questions at this point. So we tried to keep it manageable. We didn't want a 50-question survey or something like that. We will continue to do student outreach through our school time, holding meetings and inviting students to study halls to talk to them. We have a dedicated website and a dedicated email address, which we've received about 12 correspondences so far. And we put school updates in the school newsletters that go out twice a month.
A softball question. Can you say what the website is so that anyone who's watching on TV can see the website?
So if you go to the West Hartford page, our West Hartford WHPS page, and you click on the board page, it is a link on your board page.
And people can email you from there as well?
Yes, it's
Great.
rSST@WHPS.org, RSST, Rethinking School Start.
Thank you.
I just remind you, because I know you have a lot on your mind, what are our school start times? And, this weather closing one is an interesting one that we haven't researched. What would happen if we went later, and then what happens with weather? I don't begin to know, but I want to remind you of what the start times are now, just in case your children are no longer in school and you don't think about that, or there's just getting there. And our next steps are, we still have some subcommittees that are working, our town impacts, what's going, fields, daycares, students who work, a lot of those kinds of things. Transportation is still a major challenge that will be coming up. I'm trying to give you some of the challenges, not all at once. Other co-curricular impacts. One of the things I learned, and one of our speakers spoke to it tonight, is there are some very talented children who try to do their athletic programs and their select ensembles. And there's a challenge already. They're pinched to get back from contests or practices and over to them. And I know those programs, it's not an enormous number of kids, but it is something that we want to consider impacts on as well. And if there's any professional learning impacts, we will look at that. We have reserved the town auditorium on May 3rd and would invite you to attend and listen in to hear what the community is saying. It would be a great time for you guys to. I remember at Charter Oak last year, you listened quite a bit on different presentations the community had. You might be able to come and listen. Our stakeholder survey window right now is May 1 to 15, and then we would incorporate any of your input into our continued research. And with that, we have questions, comments.
So just in terms of timeline, I'm going to send you an updated board agenda planner that would have, because what we envision is last presentation, early May in terms of, because at some point you have to say, okay, well, what are we voting on? 2 options, 3 where is that? At that point, then the parents know what they're talking about when they come forward. I don't mean they know what the options are. And then I would assume the last vote would be the last board meeting, the first meeting in June, when you would vote not to implement in the fall again, but if you chose to vote to implement, it would be a year away, so there's another year of planning.
Sorry, I'm going to make work. I don't mean to make work for the committee. I'm really impressed by the work that the committee's done. But something that, Jason, that you said struck with me, which is the kids would miss the same class every time. And I'm wondering if, new person here, if we've ever considered having a rotating schedule, and that would alleviate some of that concern of the kids missing the same 8th period class. I'm sure that would be super complicated, but I thought I'd just throw it out there.
So I know Paul will certainly answer that, but I did want to just point out, as with our master schedule at the high school level, you envision around 1,500 students, each selecting 6 to 8 courses. We're running at about an 80% success rate for all students getting every course they want. So I think one of the things as parents, as I've talked to them, is, well, can't you pick certain courses to go at certain times, which we've looked at, and for some we physically couldn't do it because of the structure for like chemistry, and we just don't have the space perhaps if we were moving everything. But even that, as you're looking at that, you start to put various constraints within courses. You're going to start to significantly reduce the number of students that are able to get some of these courses. So, it's just something to think about as you put in different constraints. I know that Paul's done a lot of work at looking at various models as well, which I'm sure he'll talk about.
Yeah, so I think Julio's addressing, a counterpoint to your question, which is, could we vacate kids' schedules at the end of the day in order to lessen the burden? You asked about, would there be other scheduling impacts like rotating the day and having a rotating schedule? And all I want to say is it's expressly the reason why, if there's a decision to implement a change to the start time, it necessitates the minimum of a year of study, because we do anticipate there will be significant hurdles to simply scheduling and being able to minimize impact relative to, missed class time. So we might have to look at, changing X means an overhaul of the school schedule, which will present its own new and exciting challenges.
Just to be clear, because I understood your question slightly differently. So, for example, could you have a system where Mondays it started with period 1 and Tuesdays started with period 2 and period 1 was the last period? In other words,
I understood the question. I think Paul's getting that. Here's the issues with the pure rotation. Our science labs back up to science. So any day if science all of a sudden was period 7 is now period 1, it doesn't back up to the lab period because that's now period 8. So you're separating those classes. It's not insurmountable. You just have to change the schedule.
And then you have to hold your lunch periods fixed. So it translates into having to look significantly at our schedule, which is why we would never want to flash to bang that's very fast.
That's the issue. Is that, one of the fundamental things about this is there are ways we would redesign our schedule, many of us, if given the chance. Almost all of them involve significant cost outlays to hire more teachers, because the question is adding more periods. This is something we're going to have to be talking about in the future anyway, because the state has an increased credit requirement, which could have an impact on our schedules. It's something we'll be doing this about next year, no matter what. We'll be talking about this. But there is certainly trepidation about we're trying to make things better with this, and I think that's what's out there, is try to make things better. We don't want to do anything that would have a negative impact on 2 high schools that are exceptionally high performing right now. So that's a cautionary, and I know you mean that, yeah. The only other just immediate cautionary is we have shared staff amongst high school, elementary, and middle school. So rotating one, so our Chinese teachers, our Spanish teachers especially, that go across district to different places, so that could be a thought.
Thank you. The last time we were here, we talked about, or at least I asked some questions about the blue light, the technology, and the impacts of that. And yeah, again, I don't want to make more work for you, but I think it's quite significant. And then we also talked about the science about actually getting up earlier and exercising prior to school and how that demonstrates success. And we do it in our town right now with play. And it's, the benefits are there, the science is there and such. I'm wondering how that would impact as well. And then wondered if you did any research on the last 25 years of how many kids in our school system actually work versus 20 years ago. I looked at the numbers that were presented earlier in this sleep survey, and it's 19%. Just in this survey alone, and I'm wondering if that is a significant. I know when I went to high school, it was more like 80% of kids worked. I'm wondering if that has an impact, and the reason I'm asking that is, I think most of you guys know here, I kind of grew up as a milkman in a dairy business, and we were always up early, and I could tell you sleep was never an issue for me. But that's me, and I'm not trying to, I'm just anecdotally talking. And that's why it made me think about kids who work and after school and being able to actually go to bed and actually be tired. And that whole technology piece fits into that as well. And we're in the Olympics right now with South Korea, and you'll find it interesting that South Korea has a technology problem. And they have actually banned 16 years old and under from playing video games and technology from midnight to 6 a.m. It's called the Cinderella Act. And they have set up technology addiction centers all over the country. So just an interesting how, I'm not saying that it was a little anecdotal Olympic trivia, but nonetheless, so it was interesting. And that's why earlier I asked about that whole blue light and technology. And I'm wondering if we could somehow get it into this, and I'm obviously trying to make more work for you, but something I'm concerned about.
I remembered your blue light question from last time, and actually started to look up some articles on them. And a little bit similar to the academic impacts, I can find some articles that would say it is a factor. It is a factor delaying kids going to sleep. Similarly, finding the same number of articles that's saying when you weigh environmental factors and biological factors, the biology outweighs the environmental. But you can find research that would say it is keeping kids up somewhat longer. But as I say, I would sum it up by saying we're finding both, and it's not completely clear-cut. So that's one piece. In terms of how many students work, we plan to have a student work question on the survey, and we can certainly look into if we can find trends from 25 years ago, what percentage of, I worked after high school, I don't know if anyone else did. It was a thing to do, yeah. But we could see if in maybe historical research we see anything, maybe not germane to West Hartford, but maybe Connecticut or something like that.
Mark and I had this discussion. He brought it up. The only metric that we have, because we're not required to report on it anymore, so to be honest, we don't really have great data, is the school strategic profiles, but they stopped with that about 5 years ago. As you recall, we had that interregnum. And that was reported from our school counselors who gathered the data, but it wasn't survey-based data. It was a general idea of percentage of students working. So we can get that of what we had in the past, not necessarily now, but the survey would help.
It does seem to me that if kids get out at 1:30, then maybe they start working at 3, but if kids got out at 2:30, maybe they start working at 4. I mean, whether or not they have jobs doesn't necessarily mean that that's when they would have jobs if everybody said, guess what, we're still in school at whenever it starts. So again, it's not, I understand it's not definitive. I just wanted to come back to something you said before about I think it was about Wilton, which certainly is how I feel about it, which is we already do incredibly well. To look for higher scores is ridiculous. My concern is much more the health and well-being, both physical and mental, of the students. And I don't mean to pit athletes against non-athletes or anything like that, but my concern is if we prevent a suicide, if we minimize depression, if we, to me, that's the priority. That's the highest priority. It's not to say the others aren't, but so I just wanted to come back to that because you had made that point that is this a question of logistics or is this a question of pros and cons? Do you know what I mean? So for me, speaking personally, not for the whole board, obviously, my priority isn't can we get from an average SAT score of 600 to 610 or whatever it is, but can we have fewer people like me who didn't know it was possible to be a human being in the morning until I went to college? It was like, wow, who knew? It transformed my life. And to the extent that I am biologically typical, that's really much more of my concern than these other things. And again, that's not to say that we don't need to solve those other problems. But to me, if you find that there's a health or mental health impact on students, that to me is the most compelling argument. We could deal with working later or earlier in some other way. That's when you ask for sort of feedback, that would be my set of priorities.
I, as well, am interested in that also. And I think many times when we talk about student success, yes, reference is made to grades and IQ and things of that sort, but we also need to recognize the value of emotional intelligence. So maybe some literature that touches on that subject may address the overwhelming benefits in that regard as well.
Can I ask? Oh, I'm sorry.
Just to respond to both of you, our group that looked at the academic impacts started to look down the road of mental health impacts and simply just needs a little bit more time. They have collected some articles. They are very interested in this work. They've sent me some. We were at about 10 pages plus the board report, I think, and we thought, okay, we have a little more time in the May, so we hope to give you some more information on what we can find about mental health impacts. You'll read about them in the same literature that it's kind of a crossover in the academic piece as well, and the general sleep research. It's all kind of tied together, so we'll try to tease that piece out a little for you if we can.
I just had a question on something that you mentioned in the report, but you didn't mention tonight. That sort of piqued my interest. Regardless of however else we rejiggered schedules, some school system had commented that they had switched their in-service time from at the end of the day to the beginning of the day. And I'm not saying we should not think about the rest of the days, but is that itself a possibility of one thing that we could do is switch the early dismissal days of Wednesday to late start days of Wednesday?
Those are all possibilities. Those are all things they're looking at, talking about.
I want to throw a caution out there with it. My biggest concern with that change is that it becomes such a dramatic change for our community in terms of finding health care, child care, that I just, if we go down that path, I would want to have significant input and community support behind it, because it could simply mean the end of our ability to then provide for the continuous and ongoing professional development for our teachers, which I would sit here and tell you is the thing that enables us to stand out from other districts in terms of the quality of our instruction and the quality of our programs.
And I would never want to, I think that's a question we can ask, how does that work? It only struck me that since you have to provide the child care one end to the other, theoretically, again, I'm not saying we should do it, it struck me when you mentioned it, when you read it in the report, I thought, I never thought about that. Grown-ups like it earlier, and so that was the only...
Absolutely, everything that you bring up, there's no, there's no yes, there's yes and this, so it's understood.
I want to offer just a perspective because I've had the good fortune, I guess, of being in many other districts. I think I've said this one other time at the board table. I can't tell you how many other districts cite West Hartford's professional learning programming. And so, it's easy. I grew up in town. I've been dismissed since I was a little kid. And Wednesday, why are you in school on Wednesday at 3 o'clock? I never think about that, right? But it is, I can't tell you how many discussions in other towns say, well, if we had what West Hartford had, then, they think all the problems of the world will be solved because it is such a special thing. So, yes, it's possible, as Tom is saying, and I think Paul's cautions are very important.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't want to take them away. I mean, not without some other reason. All I meant was if we moved them,
Yep.
but kept them. But absolutely, if it was going to jeopardize the program and you thought it worked well, absolutely, I wasn't advocating that. I was just saying, it just struck me as, well, that's an idea. Sleeping late on Wednesdays.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Just on the transportation piece, which was like the biggest issue for both of the towns that you visited, and I don't remember reading it in the report. It could have been in there, and I may have missed it. What type of impact, if any, did they mention in terms of the late buses for kids who remain after school to get extra help, or even if they are practice and need the late bus to get home, that type of thing? Was there any impact there or not? And I'm thinking of, because we have a late start time, so now everything is pushed back, and the late bus, I know, usually comes later in the day anyway. So where would that leave a late bus to bring kids home if they're staying after school for?
That's a great question, and I think it's one, I'll check with some of our committee members. I don't recall it in their reports to me. I don't do all the research myself. They go out and they do their work and they report back, which is delegating the work, and they do a great job. I don't remember hearing that, but I think it's a good question. And when we report on transportation, which will be at the May 1st meeting, be sure to include some conversation about late buses. The concern that's come up for after-school help time has been the crunch between what used to be some practice time and, like a buffer between dismissal and practice time. I do not recall anything on late buses, so we will definitely include that as we do, and that will be a big challenge next time when we come to you, transportation, but again, a starting point for discussion.
If I could clarify one thing, just because I want to make sure we're accurate with things. Jason and Simsbury's athletic director have been in close contact about this report, shared information. Matt Curtis and I have been in contact, and in their steering committee, we're borrowing things back and forth. So Simsbury's along a similar path of study. But other places mentioned, there really isn't another one that is. Avon has a new superintendent coming in. They are not on this path. They may discuss it. It may be something to be looked at. They have a new superintendent starting March 1st, so this is not where they are. South Windsor's discussed it. It's not where they are. They're probably closer than any of the other areas in terms of taking a serious look at that in the area. Absolutely, we understand. If West Hartford goes this way, there's going to be other schools that go this way also. One of the things that is another cautionary, which will come up, and we haven't talked much about transportation because it's going to be in the next presentation, but that is our shared transportation with Northwest Catholic. Would they consider saying, we'll do this too? I mean, so those are we don't get to decide when those schools do. So that's an area that we'll certainly be looking at. But I don't want the idea that, well, there's 5 area schools that are talking about this at the same time. West Hartford and Simsbury are the 2 that are furthest along in this and are actively studying this now. Now, they had a meeting about it with people coming in, conference with late school start time, because there's certainly more than that talking about. We know there's many Facebook groups out there of people from different communities saying, let's bring this to our community. So I'm not trying to say nobody's doing it, but it's not as many as,
You mentioned buses, and some of the public comments, they demonstrated some data that represented that, high school students, they get more sleep or less accidents and or the traffic patterns and things like that. that was an issue. Are you finding that in the report at all? And even the buses with the traffic patterns, we're talking about that they would ease traffic patterns, and I think, as I remember, now that we're missing a chief, one of the assistant chiefs was looking into traffic patterns, and is there any data to support those claims? Like, if you move this, there'd be less accidents on the road? And
I can't cite numbers. I do remember early on in our study, we brought the question to the police department, and their data cataloged number of motor vehicle accidents by age group within the strict hours from 7 to 8 and from 8 to 9. So we didn't have it broken down, say, by 7:30, which is our high school start time, and so on. And my recollection was it was surprising that the ratio, it was not the number, it was the ratio of motor vehicle accidents that happened in the 8 to 9 hour was actually greater than the ratio in the 7 to 8. So, that's just that was just what the data was. So it was, theoretically a more dangerous time. Certainly we anticipate it's a busier time. It's more the rush hour. I know that if I leave home after 6:30, I have a longer commute. If I leave 10 minutes later, my commute is lengthened. So it becomes one of those pieces that, in the lessons learned committee, where the other districts have kind of tweaked some of their times as they've looked at those routes, and it's no longer just the distance of the routes, it's the number of vehicles on the road and how long it takes the buses to run the routes. So it becomes some of those internal tweaks, and some of that we can anticipate from our research and report on in the next report on transportation, and some of that, quite honestly, I think we're going to have to live and potentially have to make some of our own modifications if we went down that path.
I knew this was going to be complicated, but I am just overwhelmed with how much work you guys have put in on so many different dimensions. This is incredibly helpful to us as we make our decisions, incredibly helpful to the whole town to understand what's at stake in all directions as we do this. So really, thank you all for an incredible amount of work. And with that, we really do move to the easier parts of the evening, what we now call routine matters. And the first is approval of the minutes. I know this is going to be just as controversial as the others, but may I have a motion? Second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, good. All right. Board members, communications, I didn't skip anything, right? Okay. Board members, you don't have anything to report at the moment, right? That you couldn't hold till next week? Right. Next time? Okay, good. Okay. Student board representatives, that we do want to hear.
So it's been a little quiet lately at Conard, but that's not always a bad thing. But something happy, boys swimming won the CCC championship, which is awesome. And the Conard versus Hull hockey game will be at 1 p.m. on Saturday at the Veterans Memorial Ice Skating Rink, so I hope to see everyone there. Also, Do Something Week was last week. We had a blood drive, and many teachers were collecting donations around the schools. And lastly, progress reports are coming out next week.
So the past few weeks have been very eventful for our winter sports teams. Although most seasons have ended for each different sport, some teams and individuals have qualified for invitationals and conference and state championships. So congratulations to the girls basketball team for winning their class championships, and we would like to wish them luck as they advance to the CCC finals tomorrow and then the statewide postseason. Both the girls and the boys basketball teams beat Conard, which was a huge success, and the events were very well attended. The boys track team finished their season off very strong, winning Class L state meet and taking second place overall in the state opens this past weekend. Next week is Do Something Week, a week of after-school activities consisting of raising money, making care packages, and learning about social activism. The week will culminate with the second annual 24-hour famine event. And last year, we raised over $8,000 and hopefully over $10,000 this year. Next Wednesday is the third quarter midpoint, and parents are urged to check Power School for updated and accurate grades. And Pops and Jazz season is approaching, and for one of their many fundraising efforts, the program asks people to support their pet wash fundraiser at Pet Value this Sunday, February 25th in Bishop's Corner. So if you have a pet and you'd like to wash them, they smell bad, it's a good time to wash them. Well, Sunday, February 25th, all day.
Where?
At Pet Value in Bishop's Corner.
Okay. All day, what time does it start?
All day when it's open till when it closes.
Supporting the,
Pops and Jazz and like a good smelling animal. Yeah. Thank
Always
you.
important.
Yes.
Yes.
Cheryl, one thing quickly before you mention next meetings, just as a payback for this being a long meeting, the next meeting, the budget presentation, is really just the budget presentation to you. It is not, we have workshop where all the questions come out, we go through all the details, but that will be a short meeting, just so you're all, that is typically just the presentation of the budget. And I'll keep it less than 3 hours.
Thank you for that. I was actually going to say, I apologize that this meeting went so long, but I actually am really glad. I think we talked about some serious things, some specific to the issue and some broader about how we operate, and I think it's really important that we had these conversations publicly, so I want to thank you all for a serious conversation. And should you still be awake, I will announce future business. Tuesday, March 6th is our Board of Education meeting when we only have the superintendent's budget to be presented. Wednesday, March 14th is a budget workshop, which is when all the questions come up. That's also at 7 in this room. Tuesday, March 20th is a regular Board of Education meeting. And then Wednesday, another Wednesday, March 28th is a public hearing at 7 on the budget, right? People can come and talk, followed by a budget workshop number 2, which is when we get to talk, also right here. So if you want that again, Tuesday the 6th, Wednesday the 14th, Tuesday the 20th, Wednesday the 28th, be there, aloha. No, I can't imagine are there any people who would, oh my gosh. Okay, there are comments from visitors. Oh, and request for, I skipped over that. Okay.
Well, while you're stepping up, I want to express my thanks to Grace and Maddie, our student representatives, for hanging out so late. I'd like the board as a general, let's consider, perhaps we could move the student representative reports to immediately follow the superintendent's report as a regular occurrence. That might allow you to sneak out a little earlier if we tend to talk too much.
Can we just do that? That's a great suggestion. Exactly. That's right. We'll write you a note if you're going to be late.
I go late the first period.
See, exactly. Oh, there you go. All right. We're not going to, the camera's off for that one. Okay, comments from visitors. Remember to state your name and your address.
All right, I'm going to keep this quick. My name is Jason Buckman. I live at 33 Westridge Drive. Number one, I have a few things to say. I'm going to start off with, a lot of people had questions about blue light, driving, all sorts of things. They're all addressed in the survey. We know how much time kids spend on homework, on computers. It's more than half. So if you're talking about, hey, they should use less electronics, you have to start with the root homework. We also know how tired they're feeling in the morning and how tired they're feeling on the way home from school. People are more tired on the way home from school, and that can result in accidents. We also know how many people are driving. It's around 32%, if I remember correctly. I don't have it with me. We know all sorts of things. I would definitely recommend reading it, seeing what information is there. There is a lot to learn. I took feedback from multiple people, both from trying to see these different complications and things that could have to be changed. I took a lot of feedback from teachers, feedback from everybody. It's all been taken into account. definitely look over it. It will answer a lot of your questions. Number 2, I am a student athlete. I run track, I've ran cross country, I've tried wrestling, I've done a lot of sports. I can definitely say that I know you talked about buffer times between the end of school and sports. I have never had a single buffer time between the end of school and sports practice. You have to get down to the locker room, change and go out to sports. That being said, teachers will write you a pass, and all coaches respect that you are going to see a teacher, and that will make you late to practice. All coaches respect that, no matter what. Another point, I have periods 6, 7, and 8 free. I leave school at 11:40 most days, 10:40 on Wednesdays. I have a lot of stuff to do after school. I work. Another point about the working. Minimum age to work is 16. Only juniors and seniors are 16. Also, most jobs, I'd say about 90% of jobs are 18 plus due to OSHA regulations. So that being said, it's incredibly hard to get jobs. They're very competitive, and even if everyone went out and got a job, it would only be like 40% of the student population who would be able to work. I know that was brought up. Keep this quick. If anyone has any questions, I can answer any questions. Anything that's related, come see me.
Thank you, and thank you for everything, all the work that you did do. Again, you're a one-person committee, so take pride in that. Okay, thank you. There is no executive. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were leaving. Please. Of course.
My name is Mary Beth Callan Serdechny. I'm at 115 Grennan Road. I've spoken before. I just wanted to say a few quick things. Sorry. For the start school, sorry, I'm so tired now, it's so late, I'm getting to, what am I called? Start School Later Committee. I'm part of the parent group for that. I had a question on the sports part of the analysis. My son is a Conard sports senior. So Newtown is a town that changed already, and they play in sports already. There wasn't anything in the analysis on how that impacts us already. Not being clear. But
It's not a question.
we already
answer.
do. We already
Cheryl.
participate against them, and it wasn't.
No, we
in
don't
the-
participate against Newtown.
We do for lacrosse.
Yeah, that's
That's the only sport?
That's it, yeah.
Oh, okay. Greenwich?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. I knew from lacrosse. Second, with regard to Columbus Day, there are 9 states that either don't recognize it at all. It's a national holiday. 4 states definitely don't acknowledge the holiday, and 5 have in some years have acknowledged it, and some others they haven't. You can look it up on Wikipedia. Anyway, with regard to the kids, I had another issue with the starting school time later. It's a public health issue, as we know. I think it's also a public safety issue, as Tom was talking about all the safety items implemented and doing such a great job. This would only help kids, troubled kids who are always truant for first or second period. I know my own son is a senior. I mentioned this before, he was able to shift his classes to start second period. It has made a huge difference in our home, in my son's life, his grades, attitude, everything. Excited for college, everything. So this would only help troubled kids, as well as kids who are bused here from out of town. It would help those kids not have to get up so early. So I see it as a social justice issue as well as a public health, public safety issue. So anyway, I get emotional about it. I apologize. Thank you.
Don't apologize. Thank you very much. And before anybody else can come up, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Vote with your feet.